A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes and whatnot. This month, we're talking about Jeff Vandermeer's Borne. We'll talk non-spoiler for the first 10 minutes or so at the top if you haven't read it. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Words and Whiskey Short Pours, a monthly podcast where we have a fun time discussing fictional worlds and the people that create them, all while boozing just a little bit. My name is Kross.
And I'm Adam.
And we are here today to talk about the magnificent book Borne by Jeff Vandermeer. I am obviously not joined by PJ today. I am joined by my and PJ's longtime friend, Adam, also An0therCastle on Twitch. We play games typically on Wednesdays.
Yes, that is true. We've done quite a few, all in all. This is the second time that I've appeared on one of your podcasts.
It's true.
I think this is the first time I've been in the main feed. I think the other one was a Patreon show.
Also true. The Patreon show will eventually become public, but we're still working on iconography on that. But yes, this will be the first time appearing in the main feed.
Yeah, so I'm very excited for that. Be on this very fine show right here.
Yeah,
I'm
super excited.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
it's gonna
be it's gonna be fun to kind of do. It's one of those things where obviously I've known you for a long time, and we've talked many an hour. We literally just talked for almost an hour about WandaVision and the state of the MCU at large. Not WandaVision, fuck.
You did that there then too.
Doctor Strange and kind of the MCU at large, but. Yeah, we can obviously talk forever. But today we're going to be talking about Borne by Jeff Vandermeer. And before we get into kind of spoilers, we wanted to take a second to just kind of talk about the book at large. But before we do that, I want to talk about what we're drinking. Adam, what are you having today?
I am very excited because I'm going to construct it in front of your eyes as we sit here.
Yes.
So, gosh, I'm going to try not to spoil anything in my instructions here. So, Mord. Right, in Borne, giant bear. Okay, so I wanted to do a drink called the Mord, and the only stipulation was that it was brown. Basically.
Okay.
So I texted one of our good friends, Mr. Timothy Pearson, and was like, "You have a fancy book of cocktails. Do you have anything that has like maybe spiced rum? Because I'm a rum kiddo." And he threw at me a drink called the Kuba Libre. Which is, as far as I can tell, a fancy rum and coke. And by fancy, I mean you add lime. So that's what we're doing.
It is basically a fancy rum and coke, which is great, like it's...
And I'm like, you know what? Rum and coke is my favorite. That has my coke in it. No, rum and coke is my favorite, so we're going to do it. So I've got a Kuba Libre, which is spiced rum, coke, and lime.
Exciting.
So very good. I wanted to do something a little bit more fancy because this show is very fancy.
We tend on fancy. Yes.
Yeah, it's really difficult to find a spiced rum drink that isn't tiki or like coffee.
Yes, and tiki is always going to be a lot more complex than a lot of other things because you're going in the realm of where spiced rum was popular, right, or was popularized in different cases. So.
And I really didn't want too much fruit. I kind of wasn't on the fruit train, so yeah.
Nice.
So we're just doing a Kuba Libre.
Sweet. What are you are you following that up with anything? We call them back half beers. If you have a follow up beverage.
Oh, do you want to know?
Yes, we want to know.
I sent you a picture earlier.
Oh, I'm very aware, but it has to be shared with everyone else.
I was at the liquor store looking for the shots for the Devil's Cut we just did.
Yep.
And I found spiked Mountain Dew.
Yes.
So I have a regular spiked Mountain Dew and also a Baja Blast spiked Mountain Dew that I will be having later. So that'll be the back half beer. I also have more Coke and can make another Kuba Libre if I want to. So
cool.
Yeah, very exciting.
That's very fun.
Good stuff. What do you got there?
I am having a drink that I've had on the show before. Nothing crazy fancy. I was trying to think of something to do for the book. I think I'm going to come up with something for Dead Astronauts when we get there. But for now, I'm having a Manhattan. Did I pour a regular size Manhattan? Absolutely not. I made a double because I accidentally fucked up my vermouth ratios. So this is 6 ounces of booze.
That is quite a bit.
I'm going to be sipping it very slowly. So I'm very excited to be drinking that over the course of the show. For anyone who doesn't know, actually, I should correct myself. This is not a regular Manhattan. This is what's called the Manhattan Perfect. The Manhattan Perfect is 2 ounces of rye, half ounce of dry vermouth, half ounce sweet vermouth, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Not crazy. So it's a pretty easy cocktail to make, chilled, stirred. But it's very tasty. I do prefer it over the regular Manhattan. To follow that up, because I'm a moron, I grabbed a Sycamore Brewing Co. Best Buds IPA. It has, of course, the little like percentage, so they're like blazed little buds with the red eyes, but it's got the alcohol percentage on the bottom, right? And 7.420%.
That's smart. That's a good way to do it.
Perfect meme. 10 out of 10. No notes. So I bought it, and it's good. It's a solid beer.
Good.
So
that's good. That's
cool.
Good.
So with that, we're going to move into the book summary real quick, and I'm just going to read that here for anyone who isn't aware of the book that we're talking about. Again, Borne by Jeff Vandermeer. To give you just a brief summary, in a ruined, nameless city of the future, a woman named Rachel, who makes her living as a scavenger, finds a creature she names Borne, entangled in the fur of Mord, a gigantic, despotic bear. Mord once prowled the corridors of the biotech organization known as the Company, which lies at the outskirts of the city until he was experimented on, grew large, and learned to fly and broke free. Driven insane by his torture at the Company, Mord terrorizes the city even as he provides sustenance for scavengers like Rachel. Rachel goes on to find Borne and a number of other things that kind of peel in. So there's more to this, of course, but that is a teaser to, at the very least, to give you a taste of the world. Our inciting incident, of course, is that she finds a little spore on Mord that she names Borne. So we'll talk more about that. But before we get into kind of spoilers or anything serious about the book and kind of breaking it down, what do you think? What are some non-spoilery thoughts?
To introduce myself a little bit, I love sci-fi books. I basically, at this point in my life, only read sci-fi books. And so this is kind of sci-fi. It is sci-fi, but it's not like spaceship sci-fi. So long story short, I liked it quite a bit. It kind of tickles a lot of my fancies that I do enjoy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I've got some thoughts that I want to put out specifically about like his writing style. Like, Jeff, man, love it. Give me more.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Guy's a god.
Yeah, give it to me, Jeff. So I appreciated Jeff's
writing style.
Yeah.
Quite
okay.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. I got something very specific I want to talk about it, but
this book is about 300 pages long, and it is beautifully written without words wasted, telling an incredibly intricate story that tickles like every fancy of mine in a lot of ways. I'll say that, like, you know, some questions go kind of unanswered, and that's because it's not necessarily the end of the story. It is kind of the end of this story, but it's not the end of the story of this world, which is something that Jeff does a lot of. He likes to build kind of in other books and things like this. He builds a world in an environment that stories live in, as opposed to you following like one character consistently.
Yeah. You know what? I'm just going to say what I was going to say, because it kind of has to do with that, where he does a very good job of showing, not telling, about his world, so this is from it's from the viewpoint of Rachel, right? Rachel has lived in this world, right? And so Rachel knows things that we don't know, but oftentimes she'll talk about it. And so then we get to pick up on how this world lives based on context clues. And like, sometimes she just like explain things and how some things go. But I'm going to go on a little bit of a story, but we'll bring it back around at the end. So I frequent a subreddit called Patient Gamers, r/Patient Gamers, where you talk about games that are older than 5 years old. And oftentimes people will put their reviews of games that are older and for when they play them for the first time. So I read a review of the original Halo Combat Evolved that complained about, at the start of that game, what happens is that you're literally just dropped into the middle of the action. You're not really told anything about how the world works. You're told that the Covenant were after you. You don't know who the Covenant are. You don't know like what Cortana is. You don't know really anything about the game itself. And it just like lets you exist in that world. And that guy was complaining about it. And I'm like, that is great storytelling. Like, I don't need to be force-fed exposition all the time. Let me figure it out on my own. It makes me feel smart to figure out some stuff about the world. And that is exactly what this book gives me. And there's, I guess, a reason for that later in the book. But
yeah, there is kind of an explicit reason near the end of the book that we'll talk about once we kind of break into spoilers. I just want to tag into that before we jump into kind of some spoiler thoughts maybe and get into kind of the meat of things. But I did want to kind of add an addendum to that, saying that I think one of the things that's really done well throughout this book as well is this book is kind of written in epistolary style, where we're almost like reading journal entries to some degree, or like a continuous log of thought as we go through, right? As we're moving through this book, we're basically being told the story by Rachel, and her understanding of the world is also the only thing that we get. So the company might have a name. There might be names for other things. There might be more specific people who could, like Wick, could probably give us more in-depth knowledge about certain things. But because we're locked into Rachel's perspective and point of view for the duration of the book, it gives us a fascinating lens. And I think that's a testament again to Jeff's writing, and especially I want to praise this before we go into any kind of spoilers or anything else, or before we exit that, but he nails a female voice as well. Like, so good throughout the entire story.
The one thing that I was literally gonna like bring this up a little bit later, but I remember when reading Catcher in the Rye, reading about a what's the word for it? My brain isn't quite there. You don't trust the narrator. Unreliable narrator, thank you. And that's kind of what we're getting. Not that Rachel will necessarily lie to us as the reader per se, but just the fact that she doesn't know anything. It's what you were saying, is like, we only know what she knows and what she's willing to tell us. So, but yeah, it's so cool. You know,
and she just gradually tells more and more and more and more, and that's kind of what's so interesting. Is this entire story is kind of like you're tugging on a rope, you're unraveling a sweater as you're kind of going through this story, and every as opposed to chapters, the fact that it's like what Borne did, or like what was this, or what happened next, and that's your chapter header each time, is like, well, I gotta know what happens, and so then you pull on that thread and you keep unwinding, and God, it's one of the things that makes this book so confoundingly good.
Yeah, no, it's all getting those little clues about the world, like the little tidbits of like, she says it so naturally, but she's like, oh, so like that's what this is about, you know, or like, I don't know. It's just, it's just a cool thing to read, and it kind of keeps you engaged the entire time because it's just different from the way that you read, but. It also kind of reminds me, not perfectly, but a little bit of World War Z, which is one of my favorite books, because it's you know, it's got the header and then it tells you the story. Now,
yes,
it's more connected than that, right? Because World War Z is a series of stories told from different perspectives. This is all from Rachel's perspective, but it's kind of a similar idea there.
Yeah, because it lets her jump around, you know, to the important parts that are relevant to the immediate moment, or that make it feel relevant. Because there are moments in between that she'll go in and describe, you know, like a week passed, or like this happened, or like we didn't talk for this long. You know, so you get a vague sense of the passage of time, and that you're really just kind of seeing highlights to some degree. It is there. Okay, I want to get into spoilers, but I also want to just mention, this is kind of a spoiler. At one point, she mentions wanting to write a book, and like that she was never going to write a book, except for she literally wrote this book, which I think is amazing as like a meta joke of like the context of creation, because that's, you know, a subtext inside of this book as well.
There's another point that I want to talk about in kind of this term, but it gets into spoiler territory, so I'll wait for a sec. So we'll break in. For those of you who haven't read the book, if this did not do a good job of selling you on the book, I can't imagine what would. You just got to read it. Go read the book.
I'm very lucky. I have a very rare signed edition that was actually gifted to me by Jeff that I am very, very happy about, and it is like my prized possession. It's right next to me. I was terrified. This was the first time that I've read this copy physically. Man, God, I love this book. Okay, anyway, cool. With that, we're going to get into spoilers. So, get out of here if you don't want to hear spoilers.
We don't want you. Just kidding. Come back.
We don't want you.
Come back after you've read it.
Please do. And I think you'll enjoy it. This book is fucking wild.
Yeah.
in a ton of ways.
Yeah.
I had enough distance from the book because I had originally read it in 2018. I think it was 2018. It was when I was working at Sprint and driving from Maple Grove to Edina every day. And so I listened to it the first time that I read it, and then I bought a copy and then I read it. So I'd had a couple of years. I re-immersed myself in the world when Dead Astronauts came out in 2019, and I read that, and I fucking loved it again. So it'd been a bit, and I had forgotten some of the finer details that are in this story, and oh my god, it's just... I'm trying not to make this just a rant praise review, and we'll talk about other things, I swear, but
Yeah.
We could be spoilery about it now. The fucking ending?
Uh-huh.
God,
Wait.
recontextualization. But
So which part? Because do you mean the like resolution or like the climax?
the climax
Okay.
specifically. The resolution is also good, of course, because that's kind of the next logical step.
We'll get to that in a second, but
Sure. Yeah, I guess maybe we shouldn't jump right to the end. Let's start at the beginning.
Fair point. Maybe not.
Let's talk about Mord, and let's kind of start where the story starts, right? Mord, this seemingly... When you open up this book, the first thing that you really learn about the world is that there's this giant fucking flying bear. And either you're in it in that moment, or you are fucking out of it, I think. It is one of the strangest things, and you're like... And then you kind of get a sense of it, and it feels very like Miyazaki, almost, like very Studio Ghibli, right? It's got that kind of... I don't even know how to describe it. Just the weirdness of it.
Take Miyazaki, but make it bad. Not bad as in badly written, but bad as in like not pleasurable, right? Because a lot of Miyazaki is like built to like make you feel good, make you feel good about yourself. This is
Sort
kind
of indifferent.
Yeah. But no, I see exactly what you're saying. Like, Mord is the first thing I bring up when I talk about this book to people. Is just like, it's a post-apocalyptic book. There's a giant evil flying bear. Right.
and a small squid-like vase.
I don't even talk about Borne, actually.
Right.
It's like, because like Mord is just such a thing, and about like, okay, sure, it's kind of a shock factor thing, because that you're right. That's that's one of the first things that like you hear about is the giant flying bear. Which, to be fair, my brain can't necessarily pinpoint exactly how big he is.
Huge, like massive, like many buildings, like rolls into buildings and sleeps inside of them with like his head tucked up on a top floor.
Yeah, we're talking like I was going like 3-story buildings, like what you'd see downtown, something about that big. But Natalie was like, is he Clifford or is he Godzilla? And I'm like, oh, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. But
yeah, he's massive. But I think of what's so fascinating, and this is where, again, I think I get Miyazaki, is the fact that she finds Borne inside of Mord's fur, right? And so it also feels like a Wes Anderson film in which Mord could be, or not Borne, Mord could be standing up and like arising from the ruins, and you could just see like his fur going on the screen, standing up forever. I can just imagine like a loop of him like standing very slowly, and it's so visual. It's strikingly visual.
And that's kind of why I think he's huge, because, you can climb up on him and he doesn't notice,
Yeah.
And
I
so
imagine like Shadow of Colossus big, like 6-story.
Was going to say that. But
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, because, they talk about how they often scavenge from Mord and on Mord, because he lays in the company, the ruins of the company, and so like things get caught in his fur that are useful to everything else. So yeah, Mord,
so fucking cool. And then he flies, and like, what? Like, it's just a bonus fact. Like, Mord flies, and then eventually he can't, and it's like,
and that's one thing that they didn't touch on, is why he just suddenly couldn't fly.
Why would Rachel know?
That's true. They did kind of mention it. Okay, but I'm stepping away. You said why would Rachel know, but it's more like why wouldn't Jeff tell us? Because that seems to be like they go into the company at the end, and that seems like something that they could have dropped some hints or something about like why Mord doesn't fly, or like
the magician says a couple of things that are like, suppose that it can't fly because like he just decided that he couldn't anymore. There's some questions about like maybe there was damage on the inside of the company that's preventing him from flying. There's some suppositions, but there's no answer.
They did talk about after he lost his ability to fly, there was a lack of a hum humming noise that they had gotten used to, and then they noticed the absence of it. And I think that's really one of the only things they mention about it.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of weird and distant. We don't really know, you know, why or why not.
Yeah. Mord's interesting, to say the least.
So Mord is also the instigator for the story about Borne. And Borne is, gosh, like what a trip is Borne as a character. I have a real tough time even like summing up my feelings, but obviously he is the sort of root in a lot of ways, you know, tentacles and all of the emotion of this story, in addition to Wick and kind of the relationship that he has with Rachel, and Rachel in general, our scavenger, of course, of which we haven't talked about yet at all either. But Borne is just fascinating as far as it goes. And this is where the book, it took this step already with Mord, but it really confirms that this is like biopunk. It's a post-apocalyptic future. Yeah, I guess what were your thoughts about Borne himself and kind of the initial introduction and characterization?
Borne is something I would like to know more about, and is part of the reason that I'm frustrated about Rachel as a narrator, because I know we won't, because there's 0% chance that she knows exactly what Borne is, right? However, that's not necessarily true. We'll get to that in a sec. I realize I'm saying that a lot, but so my initial thoughts on Borne was like Alien, right? Because I mean, they talk quite a bit about how he's different and weird and like makes colors and everything like that, and I don't know, he's the most interesting constant, because the book's named Borne, so like we talk about him constantly, you know, and how he grows and everything like that. So God, what can't you say about Borne?
Right. It's just so fascinating. So to kind of, I think it's important that we kind of talk about Borne in kind of stages. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is this book kind of poses a question throughout the entire story about like parasites and symbiotes, and kind of that sort of reality on the world, on sort of the company. Are like the humans that are surviving, are they parasitic? Are they symbiotic? Can we work together? Are we always leeching on things? And Borne is used as a way of talking about that symbiosis, I think, and how a symbiote can turn to a parasite and vice versa, and how it's hard to even parse that line. And on top of that symbiote and parasite comparison, we also have, he's basically a child. Like and that's the even more direct allegory.
Yeah. It was a very interesting read, having a child who's growing up and like trying to teach him things in the same way that Rachel is trying to teach Borne things. So there's one scene that I really like in this, and it's the first time Borne speaks. You know, because for a long time you consider Borne to effectively be a plant, and that's kind of how he's described in there. But like, he can move; he's a moving plant. And then just one day he talks, and she's like, "What the fuck?" you know?
Right.
And so, but yeah, and then just like from that time on, the way he speaks and the way he learns and everything like that is very equivalent to a child. They copy, they take words, and they use them. Yeah. Where was I going with this? It's fine. We'll get there eventually.
Yeah. No, Him as a child is, I think, a fascinating bit of writing. And I think that to say, like, it's incredible to see the way that he grows and adapts, right? Because the first time that he talks is, and we don't really understand this, but it's after he eats the kids that attacked Rachel, right? And so that's when he first speaks, and it's kind of dicey. Yeah,
and you're right, because that's very interesting, because we know that we have this thing, and that has the effectively intelligence of a 5-year-old, whatever. But it also has immense power. It's dangerous, you know, because we know that it killed those kids, but also we don't know how smart or how controlled it is from that point on, right? So this could turn south very quickly, like if Borne chose to like be evil, I guess. But yeah, that's one thing that kind of always like kind of hangs over you, is the fact that you know that he's dangerous and you know that he's learning. So
Yeah. To throw a third metaphor in, an allegory that we are going to be talking about a lot, this story directly interrogates the can you love an android, or can like an android be loved, or where's the line between an android and a human, and where does that blur, and where does that exist? Yes, personhood. And I use the term android because I think sci-fi does a lot of this, and I think that this story does it better than just about any other story outside of maybe Android's Dreaming of Electric Sheep.
And I mean, the reason that it does it so much better is because a lot of times you can look at an android and they're almost always built to be humanoid, right? And so like it's very easy to like look at them and be like, you're a person, but this is like a shimmering, shape-shifting vase thing with tentacles. It's much harder to attribute like human characteristics to something like that. And so you're able to look at it and be like, is it an animal? You know, is it, they speak about this often, is it a weapon? You know, what is it designed to do? It's not a human, it's not humanoid, so it's a lot harder to maybe assign personhood to it. Him, Borne.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating, is that I think you're right. A lot of the time, the other part of the Android equation is that it's built by people, and the people who built it are generally trying to evaluate it, right? Like they're the ones trying to prove personhood to some degree. And so this is fascinating because there's the question of, okay, who built it? Eventually we kind of know that it came through, but we don't really know its intent. But there is that kind of looming question of, okay, what exactly is Borne? Is Borne a person? Should he be loved like a person or a child? And yeah, I don't know. I really wanted to kind of pick your brain on the side of the kind of parentage thing, of course, because you are my friend with a kid.
Token friend with a kid.
Token friend with a kid. So I guess your experience with kind of fatherhood, raising a child, how'd you feel about Rachel's approach to Borne? Fun question. Did you read this before Kiddo was born?
It was right around. But yes, I did. I either read it pre-Theo or I read it when he was effectively a sack of potatoes. So now that he's like his own being, like his own thing.
He's no longer a vase. Yeah.
Yeah, he's no longer a vase or a plant. It is different because you can actually see those parallels between kind of the stages of Borne into like a child, because for a lot of a kid's life, when you're first like becoming a parent, it's like this thing gives you almost no positive feedback. It lives to, you just got to keep it alive. It's going to eat and it's going to poop and it's going to sleep, and that's about it. And so like that's kind of the thing with Borne, is that it was just kind of there, you know. She doesn't have to keep it alive, but it didn't like do anything. So now that Theo's like, he's walking, he's starting to talk and things like that, you know, there is some, you know, equivalency there. It's a little bit accelerated in Borne.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it takes the same amount of time, but timing is hard in the book.
I agree with you. I think that it is kind of an accelerated timeline because we get through all the way up to adulthood, right? We go through angsty teen. We go through kind of a bunch of different phases. The loss of childhood, the death of childhood when he protects Rachel from the Mord proxies.
Yeah. You see a lot of parallels between Borne and like how he's learning and things like that, but it's just so fast, you know. He very quickly outpaced my own child. I mean, Theo is 1.5 now. Or he's almost 2, actually. Where's the time go? But
yeah, see, right.
But I mean, yeah, Borne very quickly outpaces that. So, do you think he gets speech because he eats the kids?
I think there are two. So here's the thing. Here's what I'm not sure about, and I tried to pay extra attention, and I went and reread this today. So it's tough to parse whether or not he gets speech specifically from the children, but I think he does, because I think that he also has to eat the brains of the kids in order to be able to internalize some of those things and senses in the same way that humans have them. Yeah. So I think so. I think that he has to eat the children in order to get the senses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't even think of that about that beforehand, but like you made the point where he doesn't speak until after he eats the kids. Well, it seems like, spoiler alert, he like absorbs them because they're not like truly dead, and he kind of like is able to like read their memories.
Yeah, that's another thing that I definitely want to talk about because that's fascinating.
Because it kind of tackles some morality. So for those of you
religion
who may not remember, whenever Borne consumes something, he absorbs it into himself, and so he doesn't necessarily consider them dead because he can feel them existing in himself, and he can like see their memories and things like that. So it's like, what's happening, you know?
And that's what's fascinating. So there he absorbs them, right? And like he doesn't lose the body parts or mass or anything like that. Like he retains it. And like specifically this is shown through, and again, show not tell. That's why this book is so good. Once again, can't praise enough. Definitely going to read some quotes. But it's implied directly through the gray eyeballs eventually showing up on Borne. That he ate the children, that's kind of our sign. But I think it's also a sign that these people are still there and that he can pick through and comb through those memories, right? And so they're holistically a part of him, which is also why he asks, I think in the end of part 2, he's like, I don't think anyone that I eat is dead. I don't think they're dead. I think dead is something different. And that gets into this fascinating question about sort of the way that like we eventually become one with nature again, as like our bodies are consumed by the earth and we are then recycled into the next things that grow out of us, right? And that is sort of the question statement here as well. I don't know. You know what I mean?
And you can kind of start talking about like souls too. Like,
yes,
what is a person, you know, in terms of that? Because we've discussed like what is a person in terms of like robots and stuff like that, but also when Borne consumes these people, and we know that, you know, they're people, like he talks about the scavenger that he eats and things like that. He seems to retain parts of them, like their consciousness and things like that. Is that a soul? You know, how do we consider that? Like, what is then a person? I don't know.
And it feels like that's fun, part of the fun of the part. Part of the pun that is kind of interrogated once again by Jeff when Rachel gives kind of the conflicting of ideas of like, well, no, they aren't because they can't make choices for themselves, right? Like he kind of implies that because their choice has been taken away, they're no longer people. And he's like, well, I don't, and Borne's like, well, I don't necessarily think that's true. And this is another case of him kind of poking at a religious argument of like predestination versus like free choice, right? And that's like just another little like this book is so like at its core, it's a great story. It's a fantastic story told in a wonderful world. And then if you just pick at it a little bit, you're like, oh my God, there's so much to this.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, like there's so much to this is because there's enough space between the stories where like you can, it doesn't give you all the answers. He could very easily have said, this is what happens when Borne absorbs a person. He could very easily have said something like that. But he doesn't have to. We can make these, like, we can think about it on our own, and we can just make, this is what we think. Like, if it was cut and dry, we wouldn't, like, be having a conversation about it. We'd be like, oh, this is what it is, and then, you know, we're
not
done.
Knowing creates tension. So the fact that we don't know creates tension for us because we're like, okay, but what happened there? Like, what was that? And then he can like give us the little hints, right? This book is not a horror book or a mystery book or a thriller book, but it is almost written like one in that way, where it's like these are core mysteries as to exactly what's going on. And so it has this kind of, I don't know, it feels like when I read it this time, it felt foggy in a fun way, like in a good way. That was kind of the way that was the first word that came up. Like the world feels like it's just shrouded in mist Yeah, it's the fog of war, and then he reveals a little bit, and you explore that a little bit, and then you can see that, and then you can make these connections with other things, and it's just like, I don't know. And then you recognize something from our world in there, and then it makes it like gives you like a moment, like just like their discussion of the balcony cliffs and like the lobby is just like okay, this is an apartment building.
This is an apartment
or a hotel.
Okay, yeah, sure. And then just when they go into, one thing that just never stuck with me was that there were people living in the company building. Like the remnants of the employees were there, right?
The cult,
cult, whatever.
It may have been a cult. Like we don't know. That's kind of
one. But like when they go to the company building and they see like, you know, tents and things like that, and like people had lived there, like it just like it's kind of abstract in a way sometimes, but then he likes to like sharpen the focus a little bit and be like, this is something that could really happen. Like, this is something that's real. We got our crazy flying bear guy over there. He's
Right.
That's probably not going to happen. But, you know, this desecration, this desolation, this like destruction of like civilization, this can happen. You know?
At the hands of Amazon, right? Which is like kind of the fun bit about the company, right? Like,
Yeah.
He's not saying Amazon. He's just saying kind of, this is also a metaphor for climate change. This episode should be called "This is a Metaphor," because like it is just like repeated metaphors and allegories and kind of moments and notes that are about all of these different things woven into, again, a tight 300 pages.
But the reason that it's such a tight 300 pages is that he gives you so much space to like fill in yourself. He gives you what you need to point you in a specific direction, and then you could just think about it. Like he
Right.
doesn't have to specify like what happened to the world. We know the world's gone to shit. We know this is how it is right now. That's really all we need. But he is very nice and gives us a little bit of Rachel's backstory.
It's true. Right at the very end.
But no. He gives us Rachel's backstory before. So he gives us some bits of Rachel's backstory in order to make the very end just hit you like a softball to the face.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Oh man, and boy does it, because it's like the thing is that she's missing a couple of years, and at the same time that she says she's missing a couple of years, Wick, you know, of whom we haven't talked about and we should definitely talk about, because he is ultimately our android in the story, which is fascinating on a completely different level.
Yeah.
Did you?
We also have talked about the magician before we really get to the end as well. So.
Yes. Oh, we're nowhere near that point. We even talked about the 3 dead astronauts and kind of the interesting thing there. There's so much to talk about, and I don't mean dead astronauts in reference to the book that is kind of a sequel to this. So
I mean, maybe
I'm not even talking about that. I'm just saying like there's something interesting there, and the foxes, and there's all kinds of things.
Yeah, the foxes is something that's very interesting, and we've barely talked about the children, the Mord proxies.
I know,
the scavengers. There's
this
just so
book
many
is
things.
so good. Okay, so getting into we were talking about Wick briefly and the memory erasing kind of beetles, the memory beetles.
So Wick is Rachel's partner, both like in the Balcony Hills and sexually. They talk about that a couple of times. So
They fuck quite a bit. Specifically,
I would
fuck.
like you texted me about this earlier.
Yeah.
They did talk about making love at one point.
Yeah, I did go back and find.
Yeah,
I did a
but
search.
they talk most of the time. They talk about fuck specifically, which is very interesting. But so yeah, he worked at the company doing something, and he currently is kind of a drug dealer, and he gets things that way. Yeah. Okay. Just so we're all on the same page.
Yes. So, Wick is a fascinating character, and maybe to wrap up part 1 for the most part, because we can really talk about the magician in part 2 and things like that. But to kind of capstone the intro to the book, the first kind of chunk, there's a complacency near the end of this between Rachel and Wick about like not talking about the elephant in the room, which is Borne. You know, at that point they've
Sometimes
got kind
literally
of
an elephant.
that tension. Well, it turns out that wasn't the real elephant in the room. There were 2 other elephants in the room that were stressing Wick out, right?
But they
at that
really
point,
need to deal with these elephants.
yeah, there are 3 elephants in the room, and no one's looking in the corners anymore. Everyone's just staring at the door. But you know, it was fascinating to me because it felt like that same kind of like unspoken tension that I like remember growing up with around parents in general, and like if they like had an argument or anything, like it was just like you put it aside and it still like stresses you out to like encounter, but you have things that you have to get done. And that was fascinating from a relationship standpoint. That was an attention to detail that I loved, and like a little, I don't know, lovely
Like,
sprinkle.
They don't see eye to eye on Borne, but the world has ended, and you really can't deal with it right now, you know? You gotta put your brain power somewhere else, yeah.
Right.
When should we talk about the twist?
Well, I think we can talk about it whenever, because I think it will impact conversation points throughout.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Because there's something that I wanted to mention, but kind of before we got to that point, is the first time I saw Fight Club. I saw the last 30 minutes. Then I watched the whole movie again, and let me tell you how much that colored how I watched that movie, knowing exactly
That's
what
fair.
the twist was.
Yeah.
And so this second reading, knowing that there were points where Borne was impersonating Wick and Rachel to each other, being able to see when it was happening and know when it was happening was like, it's so clear in hindsight. Like, obviously, that is not currently Wick. That's, Borne pretending to be Wick because of the way he's speaking, because of, like, the way he's acting, things like that. But, like, if you don't, like, my first read through, everything was fine, people are weird sometimes, but fuck. That was a kick in the face, like, when that came about, was like, oh, shit!
Yeah, and that's, like, this book delivers twist on twist on twist on twist. Like, that's kind of the other thing about it, is, like, it's kind of the first twist that really gets revealed is that twist, right? That's the kind of the first one that we get. It's like, oh, so there are times when they weren't each other to each other. And then there's that question of, like, for that briefest of moments of, like, did I fuck Borne? Like, did I fuck the equivalent of my child? And that was oof. And it's glad that that's confirmed that never happened, because that was an important clarification. Correct. But then you can also understand why Wick felt so off-put in those moments when, like, she would approach or otherwise, because she probably thought he was talking to Rachel when Rachel wasn't there, and, like, when Borne wasn't there, when she was out doing stuff. It's just
and, like, there's hints all over the place where they're like, oh, I never said that, and they put it up to, like, stress, memory lapse, stuff like that, and it's like, oh no, they actually never said that. And it's like, I know later in the book they literally sit down and it's like, okay, what did you say in this moment? It's like, this is what I said, and they, like, put together, like, when they talk to who. I know that was a scene in this book, but like you take everything else in this story and then you add a mind fuck.
Yeah, right.
Like,
right.
Ugh, that was, I think that is the most, this is going to be the wrong term, but out of character twist, where, like, it doesn't necessarily match the rest of the vibe of the story per se.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Where this is definitely, like, straight up, like horror, like aliens, like things like that sort of thing. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of things in this book that could edge on horror if you kind of leaned into it a little bit. But, I mean, Jeff doesn't, and I kind of thank him for that, but...
I don't think you've seen one of my favorite movies ever.
Is it horror?
Annihilation. It kind of. It's like sci-fi horror, kind of. It's not even... It is written by Jeff Vandermeer. It was the book series that made him popular, Area X. The book is called Annihilation.
Should I read the book?
And the movie is called Annihilation. You should read the book. It is different than the movie. Yeah, you could read the book, no problem. The books are great. I'm not going to spoil anything because the movie is, I would call it inspired by the book, but is not the book. Okay. But there are elements like this in that movie of where you're like, are you the person that I thought you were in that scene? Were you actually? And then, like, you're just juggling in your head. Brilliant. It's the same kind of mindfuck. Also, my favorite working director, Alex Garland. So it's like this confluence of things that I was just like, this is a perfect movie. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's like a Rival level mindfuck. If you liked Rival, you'd love Annihilate. It does have one horror moment in it that is genuinely terrifying in a way that nothing else has ever been and will ever be, because it's so real. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not a scary movie. It's a skin crawl moment, if that makes sense. Like, it's like horror. It's horror, but it's a horror that's been built up to, kind of. Yeah. It's not jump scary. It's just unanticipated. Yeah. Jump scares are bad. Gore. The movie is very tense. Tense. Not a huge fan of. Yeah, it's a very tense movie. There's no question there. Like, even the music makes it tense. Yeah. Anyway. I can really only, like, read scary things. I can't watch scary things. That's fair, because you can put it down. Yeah, and that's a thing, is just, like... That is one thing. I could not read World War Z at night. I couldn't do it. So, that is one of my favorite books of all time. World War Z. It's fantastic. Everyone should go read it. So... the impersonation is so brilliantly done and cleverly written because it creates this unspoken tension between them. And then also it's Borne learning about them and like learning each of them. And then Borne also says that like, oh no, I've talked to Wick. And Wick hasn't talked to Borne except for he does later. And then you're like, wait, was that Wick or was that Borne saying that he was Wick talking to Wick? You know, like there's that mind fuck as well of like, I don't actually think that Borne really spoke with Wick. Borne pretended to be Wick to Rachel, saying that he spoke. Like, there's layers upon layers upon layers of mind fuckery. And part of the only way that you can tell is because this happens after he gets injured. And then you can kind of, or the only reason that we start to be able to tell, I should say, is after he gets injured. And that's when Rachel finally notices that he's like paler and stranger. And that's the change of when we know and kind of understand that Borne has potentially been impersonating. That's right before it breaks. So up until that point, he was also impersonating. But the point at which it becomes obvious and it's shortly thereeafter revealed is after the attack.
There's definitely two moments that you can tell exactly when it's Borne and on Rachel's side. And there's one where he just like appears at her at the foot of her bed.
Yeah.
And then there's one where I forget exactly what the surrounding circumstances are, and I didn't take a note of it because I didn't know we were going to be talking this in depth about it. But she distinctly says that she went to find Borne and could not find him, and maybe he had gone out.
Right.
And so like that is one of those points where what I was talking about earlier was just like I knew the twist, and I'm like, oh ho 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 ho, that's one of those moments, you know. Yeah, it was kind of like a, not slightly spooky, but like a kind of tingly, like, where's Waldo of like trying to notice those things because I knew they were happening, you know?
Yeah, it pays that revisit. And I would put it out there. I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot, but after reading Dead Astronauts, this reread pays off immensely in ways that I never anticipated.
God.
Yeah.
I'm excited to read Dead Astronauts.
Yes, we will definitely be reading that and recording that as well. But, okay, so we talked about kind of the impersonation, of course, as we'd been discussing previously, but I did want to spend a little bit more time talking about Wick specifically. I feel like we kind of verged in and then dodged out real quick. But, and Wick also will touch on the magicians, so we'll probably kind of free flow between the two because their relationship is kind of crucial to a lot of the story.
They're kind of connected in a very important way. Should I jump to the end? Because I got a question like right at the end of Wick's story.
All of it's going to like feed back in. Okay. So I feel like the end informs the beginning.
In the end of the book, because I remember I just read it, but it says something about finding pages of like diagrams of Wick's face. What does that imply to you?
So, Wick is kind of a biotech as well, right? So like Wick is a designed creature, just like Borne is, right? But then on top of that, the Leviathan was said to have had a face, right? And so the question that it poses for me, I think it's more the former than the latter, but the question is, maybe does the Leviathan also share Wick's face? And so that's why he was so fixated on it.
The fish creature?
The fish creature, yes. Okay. That he was working on.
Yeah. That's fair. I was the first time I heard it, I thought clone, more or less.
Well, because he kind of is a clone. Like, there are hundreds of Wicks in theory.
Yeah. So, that's very interesting. It's like, that's one of those things where they just, like, say it, and then just, like, nothing happens about it, you know? Because I guess to Rachel, it's not important, because he's Wick, you know?
Right.
You don't
She doesn't linger on it.
Yeah. You don't find, like... This is what you'd find in a movie. You'd walk into a room and there'd be like test tubes and you'd find like hundreds of Wicks floating in this, you know. But you don't do that. She's like, oh, here's, you know, diagrams for Wick. Cool. Okay, bye. Basically.
Yeah, the only way to like pull this off cinematically, as I can think of it in this exact moment, is she would see like the diagrams and the camera wouldn't so much pan, like you would cut to her being sitting at this desk and seeing the paper, and it might gently pan up and you would see like the feet of a clone and like in the blue test tube with like a row of them in front of her and nothing more, like just the feet, like just the barest tease. And that's the only way that I think you could maintain the same kind of illusion or mystery that the book maintains.
Though to be fair, kind of one of the points of the book is that like something like a Wick clone would have been eaten.
True. Also would have been gone.
That's very important resources, and they've kind of nailed it into us that anything that is remotely useful has been scavenged and repurposed, and
or will be scavenged.
Yeah, and there's a point in there that there's like we needed to lower our standards so we could get more scavenged because everything above a certain bar has been grabbed,
And so that's where like people became acceptable scavenging for the company as well through the Silvery Portal, where it's like we'll scavenge Rachel and throw her into one of the recycling pools.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Wick and the Nautilus pills, those are just things, It's just, it's what we talked about before, where like, if Rachel doesn't care that much, we don't get much information about it, And so like what we know is Wick is sick, and these Nautilus pills keep him alive. We don't know any more than that. We don't know why he's sick. We don't know what these Nautilus pills are. We don't know what those are or anything like that. So,
yeah, I want to touch on something that's tangential that we talked about just for a moment, and it's that idea of the recycling pool, right? And that everything is kind of put in. It gets back to that core idea, or it especially puts it into our head that everything is biotech, and so once again, all of the things that are biotech we should treat with the same kind of humanity. Like we should be treating all things the same because everything could end up in that grand recycling pool. Rachel should be in that recycling pool. Wick should be. The foxes could be. Literally anything that is biological can go into the pool.
We can touch on this again. There's a very good statement after we talk about the magician.
Yeah. Let's talk about the magician because we should talk about the magician.
That's true. The magician is like, there's like 3 prongs to this story, and the magician is like the 3rd prong, right?
Yeah, right.
There's Wick and Rachel, there's the company, and there's the magician. The company and Mord and the magician.
Right.
And
then Borne kind of floats between all of it.
Yeah. Borne is kind of like,
he's with the Rachel and Wick. That's fine. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and like the city, whatever. But yeah, the magician is incredibly important to everything. We just haven't talked about her yet.
There's a lot that happens with the magician. The magician drives the plot in a number of ways, which is fascinating because she has so little screen time by technicality, right? But her moves, her actions dictate a lot of what happens to our protagonists.
Which I guess is kind of really nice because she's the magician, right? And it kind of gives you a sense of
mystery,
mystery, magic, basically anything like that. So like, she's doing things, but you never actually see her doing things. She has exactly 2 scenes in the book where she is in them. Right?
Yes.
There's the one where she's talking to Rachel and kills Charles X, I believe.
I don't think she actually kills Charlie X.
He's dead.
I think Charlie X is already dead. Yeah.
I thought the implication was that she killed him.
Yeah, no, she did. She definitely killed him. This is important for no reason, I swear.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, the final scene, effectively, of the book. Like, those are the 2 things she's in. But she's such a big player because, like, she's seen as effectively equally as powerful as, like, the company and Mord is. Because... there's the scene where they have that massive fight, and that's fun. That's a fun scene.
Yeah. Are you talking about the rockets? The rocket scene?
The missiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, the missile scene. Because it's like, so in our triangle, magician, Mord company, and Rachel Wick. Rachel and Wick, in the grand scheme of things, are not important.
No, they're ants.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what they talk about is like, they're not important. But obviously the magician knows that they're fairly important. The magician knows about them and goes as far as to like be vaguely threatening to them, However,
right.
the company
Wick
really
is important.
Care.
Rachel is not really important. That's
Rachel is important to get to Wick.
Yes, is leverage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a very big power differential between the 3 points of our triangle. However, the magician and the company are kind of on equal footing. So it's like she's so important, but it's really difficult to describe why. Effectively, the biggest equivalent you can pull is like she's a warlord, effectively. you know, she's something that people can, you know, rally around in the city if they choose to. They like give up some of their personality, you know, individualism, you know, freedom, whatever, but they have, I guess, security. It's kind of that classic thing of like, yeah. And she wants to not necessarily make the city a better place, but rid it of Mord and control it effectively. I was gonna read the ending again, but I didn't have the time to today, unfortunately, because she says some very important things in the end, but also Rachel doesn't necessarily tell us about a lot of those things, you know?
Yeah, because Rachel's already made up her mind, which is fascinating. And like the I don't want to talk about it quite yet. I want to focus a little bit on the middle of the story here before we hit that moment, we hit that rock against the skull. But
nothing.
I want to talk a little bit about the middle of the book here, right? Which is really Borne's growth, and this is where Borne grows inside the story and kind of matures. And this is really where I think we get to the question of evaluating our characters as symbiotic or parasitic on each other, on the world at large, and kind of like even Mord's place is sort of this giant reservoir. Did you pick at that at all? Did any of that come up in your mind, or what do you think about the sort of relationships there?
No. Like that's not something that necessarily came to on my own. Like it kind of makes sense. A lot of, I mean, Rachel is a scavenger, right? She is
so naturally a parasite,
right? Like she is taking away from the city or wherever she goes. This is the city, Wick, not Wick, Mord, the other weird name, to like improve their own station, and it's kind of like. God, we haven't gotten to the end of the book yet, so I can't make that equivalency yet.
I mean, you can, because we're in spoiler territory.
One of the things at the end of the book, after everything goes down, is like you find people working together, you know, and it's like that's how you improve your station is by working together with and making like a society effectively, because. What scavenging is taking things for yourself and, you know, for your balcony hills, your Wickborn at this point, you know, area. Whereas, like, in order to actually improve your station, you need to organize and get into a village, a society, whatever. Because...
Community. Yeah. Something communal.
You can't be... competing for resources. How am I going to finish this up?
It's more like I understand the competing for resources. Pooling effort, I think, is the benefit of a symbiotic relationship, right? Like it's a trade, right? Versus just a take. That's what I find. That's why I think that this is such an apt metaphor for kind of the book and different parts of it, is you've got a symbiotic relationship to start with between Wick and Rachel. You've got a symbiotic relationship to some degree between Borne and Rachel. Like they're both getting something out of their experiences. You've got a parasitic relationship between Borne and Wick because they effectively are creating stress and tension for each other and taking energy from each other in those moments, right? So they're, while not directly scavenging or stealing things, they are negatively impacting each other in the same place. So it's got a kind of a negative connotation. You've got the group of them, they're parasitic to Mord, which is kind of the cow, if you want to put it that way, for society. Like that's where all the resources are. At the same time, Mord is also a tyrant, and I think he's described as such in the book a couple of times. But
yeah, Mord will kill you, but like because he's kind of how new things enter into the scavenging economy. Because I mean, you can only pull so much out of the city before everything relatively useful. And we talked about this earlier, where the bar gets lowered and you have to grab different things. But Mord, who comes out of the company, and people really just don't go into the company because of Mord and Mord's proxies, and then he just like a big brown Santa Claus, just like brings company gifts to all of the good scavengers in the city. So being parasitic isn't necessarily, I would say, the correct term between like I guess, for like Rachel and Mord, because Mord isn't necessarily losing anything.
Yeah, he's more like a mineral patch.
Yeah, it's more like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it, because they're effectively to him ants. It's like, if ants take away my crumbs, I don't care, you know?
It's important also to say that this entire book has a tone of the world being very indifferent. Like, the entire book has a stark indifference to it, to the protagonist, to the characters that are inside of it, to kind of everything. Yeah. And it's saying that also the world owes you nothing. Like, the world doesn't owe you anything, but you have the ability to imprint upon the world a better system. And like, the magician is the opposite of that. The magician is someone who's trying to take advantage and is trying to break down Mord, which is seen as this tyrannical element in the system, but is doing so via diabolical means.
Here's what I like about what you just said, is that the world is indifferent. And I think the reason that nobody has necessarily improved their station, be it through selfish or selfless means, you know, is Mord. So I think Mord is forced indifference in this story. Mord is a force of nature. He doesn't necessarily care about you or about anything. He just knows that he is in control. He controls the city. Control is not quite the right word. It's like
reigns over, lords over,
because he almost does. He does nothing purposeful, right? So like whatever you're trying to do, it will be destroyed by Mord, not out of malice per se, but out of indifference. Right? So he is indifference personified.
Yes.
He will eat you, not because he hates you, but because you're there and you look like a popcorn shrimp, you know?
Right.
So like,
and you're tasty.
I don't hate the popcorn shrimp. They just taste really good in tartar, you know? So, like, I think Mord is a force of nature more than anything else. And you can kind of equate him to a snowstorm or tornado, whatever. It's been used everywhere in fiction about, like, in Dune, the worms, you know?
Right.
Things like that. So...
he's elemental.
Yeah. Yeah, he's effectively... You have to beat him before you can do anything else, which is why the magician is specifically targeting him in that, because the magician wants to be in control, be in charge, but you can't really do anything until you deal with the bear.
The elephant in the city.
Yeah.
Right. The flying bear in the city.
And all of the little bears.
The micro terrifying venomous bears.
Because let me tell you, if they were just like straight up grizzlies, that'd be scary enough. But they had to give them like venom and shit.
Yeah, poisoned claws. Are you kidding me? That shit's terrifying.
Yeah.
Not to speak of like the acid rain and everything else that's going on. I love that you're drinking your water out of the bowl because that's where your ice cubes were.
Yeah, I was just drinking the extra ice.
Yeah, no, it's great. I just thought it was funny. Fuck, this story is so good. And that's just like another layer on top of this whole thing, right?
So much shit we can talk about.
Right, and it's 300. There are so many books that do so much less in 300 pages. Like
we haven't touched on like Borne when he gets banished and like the scavengers that Rachel meets, and holy fuck. The magician's cloak,
yes,
I think is one of the coolest things in this entire story. It
biotech.
just makes her invisible. And yeah, it's literally like, it's biotech. Like pretty much every sci-fi story uses technology the way we assume it would in like robots and stuff. But this book is all about genetic manipulation and using living technology. And like even her cloak turns her 100% invisible, but it's something that's living. And like, I know at the end is like, I think it's like a throwaway line near the end of the book where Rachel like takes her cloak because it was almost dying because it's a living thing, and she puts it in her bag and is just like, you know, we'll put this somewhere. I didn't write it down because I'm a fool, but yeah.
Right. Well, you're right. She's like, this will be useful, like, after the fact. She's like, this is still biotech, to the same degree. Like, we can make use of this.
Yeah. We didn't mention her cloak, and that's a very important part of the magician, is that she has an invisibility cloak and is very sneaky.
And it means that there's a time that implies that she visited the balcony cliffs and that she was able to sneak through. There's some footprints that are, like, unaccounted for and some traps that weren't triggered.
Wasn't that in
part 2?
Was that in part 2? I thought that was in the company.
There is in
building.
The company.
Okay.
No, the company is definitely accounted for, but there is a moment because she had been going in and out to talk with Wick. Like, that's what's revealed in part 3.
I 100% missed that.
Okay.
You said it was in part 2?
It's somewhere in part 2 is that she is clearly going in and out and talking to Wick because ultimately she's trying to hold Wick hostage, right? And like holding Rachel kind of as this advantageous point, which is what also encourages him to write the letter. Like all of this.
We haven't even talked about the letter yet.
Circumspect. Yeah. Oh my God.
At all.
Fuck. This book is so good. I did want to read this line in particular. I think this was the most important passage to me. Reading it this time. So this is what struck me. So it's in the moment when Borne is getting kicked out of the apartment, right? Like when Borne is being removed.
This is like the end of 2, isn't it?
It's near the end of 2. Yeah. It's right before she says goodbye, Borne, right? And goodbye, Rachel. And like she says that those are kind of the last words, but they aren't really. Wait a second. Is this? Oh, sorry. This is in 3. This is the last time that they talk to each other before Borne goes off and fights Mord.
Yep.
Yeah. But still, I think this is important because I think it gets to the heart of Borne's relationship with Rachel, and I think it also gets to the heart of Wick's relationship, and it's kind of made mention of earlier. But anyway, so she says, Borne. All I could say was his name because I couldn't say anything that really told him how my instincts clashed with my reason, not in front of Wick. And I thought, too, that Borne was gripped by the false power of remorse, which makes you think that by strength of your convictions, your emotions, you can make everything right, even when you can't. Remorse and a false vision made Borne say these crazy things, I thought. And I was just like, you're so right. Remorse all the time makes you believe that you have this superpower, that you could do better, and that you can like overcome and forgive your own wrong to someone else. You know what I mean? Like that is a powerful phraseology. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. There's a lot of shit like that in this book.
Yeah.
Like he's a great writer. Not
profound.
That we've said that multiple times, but he's a great writer.
For like talking about like how incredible of a writer is, we've read shockingly few of the quotes. But to be fair, you could quote most of the fucking book. It's so pretty and beautiful, and like you could open to any page, and I'm sure there's something good on it.
I wanted to read the first line before.
Just do it.
Just because it just like lays the foundation of the story so well. But it's literally just, I found Borne on a sunny gunmetal day when the giant bear Mord came roving near our home. And it's just like, okay, that's how we're opening the book. It's just like, giant bear, sure, yeah. But,
God, I adore his prose. And so I think I texted this to you. I've been reading an obscene amount of Brandon Sanderson over the last couple of months. I adore the man for his plot and storytelling chops. Incredible what he conveys. And magic systems genius and sort of the level of thought and sort of the scientific reasoning behind a lot of it is great. Fantastic. But I miss this in his stories more than I miss anything else, which is just that flourish that gives this polish of extra, of humanity, of like something just that hits you in the right spot and just makes you go, you shudder. And that's the thing that Jeff does like every 2 pages, which is crazy.
It's always very pleasing to read. Even when bad things are happening,
right?
It is pleasing to read. Like, it just, aesthetically, the words and the sentences are just nice, you know? Like, even when, like, Borne is getting mauled by the Mord proxy the first time that they go out, it's like, the way that he describes it, and the way that he describes Rachel inside of of the rock Borne is just like, it's very pretty, but not, the imagery itself is not pretty, but like the way it's described, it's a difference between what the words mean and what the words look like, you know? It's just really well done.
Yeah. And I think that's also, at the same time that we're talking up this pretty language, that's also simultaneously the magician's downfall, is that she thinks that she can use words to like win people over, which I think is also fascinating. I don't know. There's so much in this fucking book. Yeah. Okay, needless to say, let's talk about the kicking out of the apartment. I think we can move to that point near the end of part 2. That
kicking out of the balcony cliffs or kicking out of the apartment?
Borne being kicked out of the apartment. Okay. Like being removed from the balcony cliffs.
Before this, Borne moves out of Rachel's apartment into his own apartment, which is, I think, an incredibly important part because you go from... It's literally like how we were talking about before. His growth is just accelerating in terms of like what we know in our world about like equating him to a child. Is just like, oh, he hit 18 years old, quote unquote, really fast, and he's going to college, and he goes into his own apartment and he decorates it, and we'll talk about the astronauts later.
Oh fuck, we've skipped the astronauts so much, so often.
See, the astronauts don't seem important when the first time you read it, but they are.
Right.
But like I'm assuming they're even more important because you've read the sequel book or the second book or the other book, however on Earth they go together.
How do you even qualify Dead Astronauts?
The way I understand it, Dead Astronauts is even weirder than this one. I have not read it yet.
It is wild. I would simply describe it, because I'm a non-spoiler person, and I definitely did this. I described it this way when I read it. It's what I imagine an LSD trip is in the form of a novel.
It's sitting on my bedside table because
I know.
I knew we were going to do this.
We can do it. Yeah.
And I didn't want to like read it before we did this podcast.
We've made it.
So
truly, just as a note to anyone at home, my recommendation with Dead Astronauts is set aside 2.5 hours. Read it without stopping, because you don't want to stop. And it is confounding in all of the ways that this book is confounding, except more so, and then some. And it is the most unique reading experience I've ever had. And it is in my top 10 favorite books. Like, anyway, that's it. That's the whole thing.
I remember we were sitting in a Shake Shack in New York, and you were describing Dead Astronauts to me, and I'm like, this sounds crazy. And you're like, you need to read Borne first. I'm like, okay. And I cracked open Borne, like 6 months later, and I expected it to be how you described Dead Astronauts. And no, it's a regular ass book. Borne is a regular ass book. Dead Astronauts, I don't think is a regular ass book.
Dead ass, it's not.
Yeah. So, very much so looking forward to reading that book. But
you know, I like this preface, is that it has a 3.4 on Goodreads, and what's crazy is they're almost 1 or 5-star reviews, like almost entirely. And so it is such a polarizing book.
That's fair. From what I've heard about it, that makes sense.
Yeah. Because it is fascinating. Okay, anyway, I don't want to rant about it too much. Let's talk about the Dead Astronauts, though, because I think it is an interesting bit of
are we going to
go
back to him
in the apartment? So it's in combination with the apartment. So
okay, and then we'll talk about him getting kicked out of Balcony Hills.
Yes,
we'll go back to it.
Because like you said, it all ties together.
Because I mean, we have to go backwards a little bit to talk about Dead Astronauts.
All that I'm saying is those 3 dead astronauts, of whom we find kind of planted as though they may have fallen from the sky or something else, fascinate Borne. So Borne eventually takes those in and then puts them on his walls, despite protests from Rachel and otherwise about like leaving them be, their dead bodies and otherwise. They appear to maybe not be astronauts, to actually be people in contamination suits.
It's clearly said. It's clearly said that they are people in hazmat suits. It is clearly said in the book. Yes. I paid attention to that specifically. So it is clearly said that they are people in hazmat suits, but Borne keeps calling them dead astronauts. And that's actually what Rachel says first when she finds them buried, I believe, up to their waist in the courtyard. As if,
shoulders are popping out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think she assumed it was a trap or something like that.
Yeah.
And then was that the first time that she goes out with Borne that she sees them? Or how does he get them? I don't remember.
First time? No, he gets them on his own. He had to have. got them on his own.
Yeah. But how does he know that they're there? Because she goes out and she finds them.
It's the time that she's creeping with him. Like, she's stalking him, right? Or he's stalking her.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's what I figured. So.
He's like pretending to be the man in the trench coat, like three kids stacked in a trench coat with a hat, a floppy hat on top.
He's a wizard, quote unquote.
Yeah, he does say, "I'm a wizard."
Yeah, he's just like, that's one of his favorite disguises. Anyways, so the dead astronauts, they're out in the city, they're in a courtyard, they're buried up to, I assumed their waist, but maybe higher.
It's like its shoulders, because they're like popping out of the ground just a little bit.
Okay.
I know this because I know this.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's part of the next book.
Well,
so one thing that's really interesting, slight side note here, is that they say that they see more astronauts in the holding pond when they go to the city, which I thought was really interesting, because knowing that the next book is called Dead Astronauts.
You're paying a lot of attention to the dead astronauts.
I am paying so much attention to these astronauts, these quote-unquote astronauts, and like how they are treated in this book. So, anyways, Borne's apartment, he hangs the astronauts on the wall. It really kind of weirds out Rachel, because obviously, he has dead people hanging on his wall.
Right. It's true.
Yeah, I mean...
and that's so interesting, because I think... Again, this gets into the kind of fascination with Borne himself and the way that he eats living things and consumes them and makes them a part of him. And I think he has a fascination with something that actually dies and ends, because there isn't an end inside of him. And so I think he kind of idolizes this to some degree, because he doesn't know death. And so these are examples of something that he does not understand and will never understand. And at the same time, fun ornaments in his room. Lizards, moss, astronauts.
I'm trying to find where she first sees the astronauts in his room, and I thought I had literally flicked straight towards it, but I think I was a bit too far off. So I literally flipped to the page where he moves out, but oh well.
Yeah.
Anyways, I was trying to figure out exactly like what her words were when she saw the astronauts. But so let's see, what is the timeline of the astronauts? They're buried in the ground. They're on Borne's wall, and then they get thrown out.
They get put back out. The magician then I don't think they get moved onto the roof, and then they get put back down, right?
So
near the ground, and then the threat.
I thought they went out
and then buried.
Yeah, is Balcony Cliff at the edge of a cliff?
No.
Because I assumed on the backside, like, there was, like, a cliff that if you went out the backside, you came up a top. But that's just my brain.
Well, so it's an apartment building, right? With, like, hollowed out edges or sides. So it kind of feels like a cliff.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So it's kind of like the bones of it.
I
imagine, like, hourglass.
I always assumed that it was pushed up against, like, it was jutting out from a real cliff. Or there was, like, a cliff built over it. I
think that's what's so fun about this to some degree is that there's so much space to play inside of your brain with some of these things. And it's meant to be a nondescript city for that reason. But yeah.
So in my brain, when I see the balcony cliffs, it's literally like only the front is coming out of an actual cliff face.
Yeah.
Kind of like the apartment building was built into a cliff, which is probably wrong. But so when they go out the back, I see them coming out like at roof level, but behind. And so that's just, I don't know, that's just how my brain worked with it. But so I believe the astronauts were put out back, and then, somebody loyal to the magician created graves for them.
Yeah.
And then labeled them Wick, Rachel, and Borne.
I truly believe that it was the magician themselves, which is that like sneaky footprint thing through, because I think that was another sign of like, I can sneak through here and I have power here where you believe you have traps and other things. But that said, I do want to at the very least make mention of the grave, right? Which I think is it's very good of Rachel to have buried them, I think, to some degree, because they were kind of propped up. They were used as ornaments inside of a room for a creature who barely understood. The proper burial for 3 heroes is appropriate.
Yeah. And she specifically said, now you're not part of anyone's games. Something to the effect of that. It's very similar verbiage. So I I like that quite a bit because it's literally like there's not a whole lot of old school humanity like that
Yeah.
in this world, but you don't really bury somebody like that. You just kind of leave them where they are. But this is a very ritual. It's a very symbolic action of like, because she thought that they had been, hanging on the wall. That was incredibly rude. Rude's not the right word. What's the correct word?
Macabre. It is. I think she describes it as macabre. But...
Yeah, and I mean disrespectful to the dead, right?
Yeah.
And so she does something that is not necessary. She buries these guys, girls, these dead astronauts in a way that is not really described anywhere else. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's very symbolic of like how she is still, I don't know, old school, I guess, more than anything else. So
let me tell you from a perspective of having read Dead Astronauts, I flinched at some details. What's up? I'm not going to spoil. I'm just saying I flinched at some details when reading that I was like, "Oh fuck. Oh shit. Oh fuck. That has implications." And yeah, I'm very excited to finally get to talk about it because that is like I adore this book. There's nothing like Dead Astronauts, and I'm very excited to talk about that when we get there. But you need to read this book in order to understand that book, and I haven't even convinced PJ to get to that point. Ooh, okay. Adam has finally opened the Mountain Dew. I need a taste sampling. I need you to taste it and let us know.
So this is the hard Mountain Dew Baja Blast here. This was what was requested on the Discord. Go join the Words and Whiskey Patreon. It gets you access to the Words and Whiskey Discord, and you can talk to like-minded people and tell me what hard Mountain Dew to drink. So this goes out to, I think this is Sharkbait that said do the Baja Blast. So
yes.
Huh. Okay. You know what it tastes like? It tastes like if you put some vodka in a Baja Blast.
Oh,
like
no.
It
kind of
tastes
unfortunate that it doesn't taste better.
No, I mean it tastes exactly how you expect it to, but like in a not bad way.
Okay, so here's the thing, Adam. I literally did that in the 4th episode in Red Rising. In our 4th podcast episode, I literally drank a vodka Baja Blast. So you say that, and I have visceral memories of doing that on the show.
You gotta try this and tell me how it actually compares, because like
I bet it's better because the other one was flat.
Oh yeah. This is not flat, so
yeah.
But like, this is definitely something you would drink in college. You know,
Sure.
I remember like the first time I went and I had alcohol. It was with our friend down in the cities, and like it's got that sharpness of the booze, you know, but like you could tell it's not high quality booze. Obviously, it's a Mountain Dew, spiked Mountain Dew, but also like they got the ratios right. So like you get the Baja Blast and you get a little bit of sharpness from the alcohol, but it's not like it doesn't taste bad. You know?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can get behind that. I can understand that.
Yeah, it tastes exactly like a mixed drink that you would make at like a house party where like you're playing beer pong.
Sure.
With like a bunch of college kids.
That tracks. I can definitely track that. So
it's worth it. So
cool.
I don't know. I've got a 12-pack of this right now, and I have 4 different flavors. And so I got the Baja Blast, and depending on how long we go, I got a regular Mountain Dew. But we've been going for a long time.
Yeah, I imagine.
And we haven't even touched everything.
Well, I mean, we're getting there though. We're almost at part 2. So we talked about the Dead Astronauts. We talked about the apartment itself. Did you have anything else to talk about in the middle here with Borne, Rachel Wick, before we kind of get into the escalation of things, them getting kicked out of the cliffs? Otherwise,
I want to touch on not now, but
the duck with
later.
the broken wing. Do you want to talk about the duck, the bird with the broken wing? Oh,
sure.
Sorry,
that's not what I'm talking about.
Kidding.
Not yet, but in a little bit, I want to talk about Borne's journal.
Oh, Borne's journal is good. Honestly.
That was incredibly interesting because I forgot about that after my first read.
Right.
So
me too.
Reading it again, I'm just like, oh, he knows how to journal. Forgot about that.
He's so with it, And he wants so badly to live up to Rachel's expectations. You know,
Right.
that's what hurts with Borne moving out, right? Is that she finds that journal, and you know, there's the whole fight of like him moving out and everything else, and it's just this immense moment where the kid becomes the adult, right? Like in a real way, and you're just left with kind of profound sadness in a good way. Like I mean this from a reader's perspective. Like, being impacted this much by writing is fantastic. But I remember, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but this isn't like crazy personal, but it's a little bit personal. Like, moving out of my parents' houses variously was very different, but I could feel that same sort of emotional moment reading Borne's journal. Like, reading that, it's like it's the same kind of like want or desire to like fulfill needs and like everything else, and like also starting to be on your own and like live up to expectations. And it just it hit in this weird way. I got this when I was born. My mom wrote me this letter, right? And I got it when I turned 18. And like, that was a fascinating thing where it's like this very expository moment of like her and like growing up and like getting to understand like the place and time which my mom and dad were. And it in the same way, this is so crazy, but in the same fundamental way, the story pulled on those same heartstrings, like on those same base, like growing up, loss of childhood, loss of innocence, heartstrings. I don't know. It's tough. I almost cried this time reading this part about like him getting kicked out and then the journal. Like I lost it. That's why I read the passage, because I was like, God, it's so good.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the journal is that it's one of 2 times in this entire book that
It's not
Rachel is not the narrator. But to be fair, the second time, Wick's letter, she is actually the narrator, because there's literally a point in there where she says, there's other things in that letter that I will not tell you about.
She's recanting, yeah.
I fucking hated that, by the way. But
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to our idea of like personhood a little bit, because you can tell, you can 100% tell that Borne was not trying to kill people per se, but he had to. Like, he was driven to. It's like, not to be super cliche, but he was like a vampire. He had to feed on people to live, you know? Right? And so, like, it's what you said. It's heartbreaking because he did not want to do that. He didn't want to kill people because Rachel said it was bad, and Rachel said that you can't do that, but he had to. And then there's the moment where he went like slightly Dexter, where he's like, I'll only kill bad people, and that lasted for all of 2 weeks. But
it's one.
Yeah,
I don't know. You want so deeply to understand things through Borne's eyes, and through, like, especially when he's like, I have 9 senses. Okay, what are those other 4 senses, Borne? Are you going to tell me?
No, of course
like,
not.
I want more of that.
Like, we have.
Right. Well, he does, because I think he ate a brain or 2. So I think he gets it, and he's like, well, I have more senses than she has, so I have more understanding of the world.
He can see shrimp colors.
He can, definitely shrimp colors. At the very least, the mantis shrimp, and can, anyway.
I think that's not actually a thing, by the way. Anyways.
The mantis shrimp colors?
Yeah.
The spectrum?
I think that shrimp can't actually see additional colors. I think that was just like a flub in some data. I think I read that. Cut this out if I'm wrong.
I'm sure that the mantis shrimp, it's not that they can necessarily... They've got a deeper view of the spectrum. It's not more colors. They just have more lenses to interpret the colors that are in the same spectrum.
Yeah.
It's the same problem that I have, but it's in a different degree.
But the opposite.
Basically.
They can see more colors. You can see fewer colors.
Correct.
You got to sneak one in every episode.
I can, yeah, it's not, I tried to sneak in a StarCraft reference every episode, not a colorblind joke. But yeah, no, anyway, point being, roundabout here, I love the 2 different moments that we diverge from her perspective. I did want to make mention when you were talking about the letter to the Wick letter, where she recants some of the things. I think that those were probably mostly lovey or sexual in nature, which I also like in my head. Like that's my read on those redactions from that letter is more one of affection more than anything else.
That makes so much sense, and I don't know why I didn't think of that.
And it's just like he doesn't want to be like crazy sexually explicit, given like we get sex throughout this novel a number of times. We haven't really talked about it a whole lot, but there is sex here. It is present. It's not overly described. It's not overwritten, not underdone, but it is an important exchange between exchanges almost too base. It's an important moment between our characters, between Wick and Rachel, and it makes us like think about the relationship in a bunch of ways. So I was rooting for them this time around. Yeah. I was not the first time, but I was rooting for them this time around.
Kind of coming around on that, Jeff's use of sex is actually really interesting to me because he definitely uses it as like a humanizing thing. He's like, with all of this like crap that's happening, you know, the apocalypse, everything, like these two characters are like in a relationship, and it's not like, and it seems like a fairly healthy relationship. Everything's like said and done, you know,
especially if you remove Borne fucking with them from the equation,
right? Yeah, and like it's about as healthy of a relationship as you can get in the apocalypse, you know, like they don't take advantage of each other. You're right, like the sex scenes aren't really explicit. I think the most explicit thing they ever say is like, he got hard against me. Like, ooh. Ooh. If you listen to these short pours, you've listened to the romance one. There's a lot worse stuff, you know?
Right.
So like,
but I think it's also good that he doesn't shy away from it. You know what I mean? And it's we fucked, and like it's very. He
treats it as just like a normal thing that happens, which is such a breath of fresh air. Where it's like, it's not given a certain, you know, gravity. You know, it's not like end all be all. It's not like the most important thing they do, but it's just something that these two people do who are in this relationship. I don't know. It's actually really refreshing the way that he specifically talks about sex.
Yeah, it's strange to call it eloquent because it is the most harsh moments in some ways of the novel, because it just hits you with the we fucked, or like I grabbed him and we embraced and we did it on the stairs, or we like all these different moments.
I think they literally did it when the biggest fight was happening. Like,
just after the rockets.
Yeah, didn't they do it just after the rocket scene, like in that like
so.
dusty, you know, air duct or whatever they were sitting in?
Yeah. Which is like because they were close to each other and it was just this moment, and you know, it's all that. It's clever portrayal too, and it's well done. It's well done in a similar way to also like the. You think about how to approach. I don't necessarily want to talk about that. I do really appreciate the origin story of Rachel, and I think we need to just get there, and then we can kind of talk about it a little bit.
We haven't even talked about that.
Right, I want to talk about like ethnicity, its implications, and like its lack of implications actually on the story, which I think is fantastic.
That is one thing that they don't necessarily talk about is like what you were saying is ethnicity. Like she comes from an island nation.
Right.
Like you can
assume something like Hawaii or the Philippines or
you can make some assumptions based on that, and the only thing they say about anything, like any description of character, is that Wick is pale and translucent.
Right.
Rachel doesn't actually describe herself at all.
She does at one point. She's brown skinned.
I think
nearish the beginning.
Okay.
Brown thighs. It's when they're fucking the first time.
Yeah.
Is when that happens.
I guess I took that as she's a scavenger, so she's tan. To be fair, when I first read that,
I think of it as like an islandish thing, especially when you get the context and
I guess I don't think they describe any other characters in any sort of physical way like that outside of like, I think the magician is tall. You know,
I think so. Yeah, she's tall for a woman or something like that.
And like they describe when they go to like the scavenger base, they describe I think one of the people, like the kids, has short hair or something.
Yeah, teams. Yeah, with the short hair, the boy.
Yeah. Or like the scavenger that she's talking to, they describe her, but I don't know.
I think that's a good jumping off point to actually talk about the boys, which are the kids rather, under the magician and the post. Leaving the apartment, rather not post leaving the apartment, but when Rachel ventures out.
When she's a ghost?
When she's a ghost, yes.
By the way, sorry, slight tangent. I fucking love the writing when she's a ghost.
Yeah.
Because it's just like...
You're going to love Dead Astronauts then, because
the fact that she like describes herself as a ghost gives you such... It like...
It paints
Hi,
your
Kat.
perception of the world in that moment. Right?
Yeah, and
you
like
get an
how she
idea.
perceives herself and how she's carrying herself and everything like that is just so. Just the phrase like "I am a ghost" gives you so much background and like gives you a really good like point to stand on and jump off of into how she sees herself and how she's carrying herself. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that. Jeff, shout out to you. If he
Jeff follows me on Twitter. He's great.
Yeah,
Jeff
you know
and I talk
what?
quite a bit.
You know what's a fucking like stressor to me? He liked the tweet when you said we were covering the book. Anyways,
Yeah.
I don't assume he's going to listen to this, but if he does, Jeff, I love you.
Jeff owns the rights to one of my short stories, which is a fun fact. It's the only thing I've been paid to write ever, like a specific piece of media. But it's cool. Eventually it'll get published maybe, but we'll see.
Someday.
Yeah.
Anyways, what were we talking about? Jeff did good things.
Jeff did great
ooh.
writing about the ghost.
Ghost, yes. Yeah, that whole thing was cool. I like the ghost. Sorry, that was not a very good ending to that. Yeah,
No,
ghost,
I mean,
cool,
it's fine.
good, muy bien.
Ghost, cool, good, muy bien. But I think it gets into, the bit with the ghost gets into the kids that are in this environment and the other scavengers. This is kind of a real introduction to other people to some degree. We see the magician. She's kind of the top of a different pyramid. But the kids are left to fend for themselves in this world, and you question where their parents were, who birthed them, and like how'd they get here. And there's just all, for me, there's so many questions about how there ended up being so many children that are just kind of abandoned and orphaned in this world to various degrees. But I can also see it being really easy to orphan a child in this environment.
I like to imagine that there was some sort of great war that claimed a lot of the adults, but I don't know for sure. I think
I mean, hell, you could say the war between Mord and the magician, claim the adults.
I think this scene specifically is why this wouldn't make a good movie. Because
The scene with the big man at the campfire.
Yeah, specifically the existence of this band of children, I think would kind of pull you out a little bit of the story. And I don't necessarily know how to clarify that at all. But it's one of those things where, like, I think if you saw this band of kids on, like, the big screen, I think that whoever the director is would try to make it incredibly sympathetic, and, like, you're supposed to feel really bad for these kids, which you should probably. But they're generally described as self-sufficient in the book. I mean, they're trying, to be fair, they're trying to give away one of the kids. That's not necessarily great, but...
Right. Not a good thing. Not a good thing. I think I agree with you, but I don't think it's the most unfilmable moment. I do think that basically what you would do is instead you would just like keep how you convey things like this, or how I think about conveying them in screenwriting and things like that, is you'd keep the camera on level between your good characters and your bad characters. And that's how you keep everyone feeling like they're the same type of person, is by keeping the camera focused on the same level as you go between them. So I feel like the move would be to take these kids and humanize them as adults as much as possible while keeping their language kiddish. You know what I mean? Like, make them talk dumb or like children, but then make their actions mirror what they need to do to survive. I imagine like the War Boys from Fury Road to some degree, right? That is like an eccentric example and not perfectly proper, but in the same sort of characterization way of like people being forced to survive in ways that you wouldn't expect. And like, how do you humanize them? Well, it might take an entire, movie to make one look good, but it's not really the quest of this movie. Yeah. I don't know. There's also I don't know if you've read it. Have you read The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
No, you've talked about it though.
It's one of my favorite books. It's in my top 10.
I think I'm getting it confused with the Book of Eli.
Okay, interesting, similar, different in a lot of ways. They share some traits. It's a dad and a kid.
Yeah. Isn't that
father and son?
The same with the Book of Eli? And they're traveling to a place. I realize that's incredibly vague. They're traveling to a place, but
well, in the they're traveling to a place way that is how Cormac McCarthy is kind of described. So, or that's the way that he kind of even describes it, is they're traveling to the coast. Ooh. But also in the Book of Eli, they're kind of traveling to the sea. Coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Anyway,
should I read the Wikipedia plot or should I read the book?
I would say you should read the book because
Sweet. Closing Wikipedia.
The book is fascinatingly written. I read it once a year. It's 240 pages, and I read it once a year. My copy is actually about to give up, and so I have to get a new one because it's going to break. There's also a movie with Viggo Mortensen that is pretty good.
2009.
But film. It is probably too spooky for you as far as
movies
go.
That's one problem with a lot of post-apocalyptic media is that a lot of times our authors and directors want to prove how dangerous the world is, and then they just do some random shit. They're just like, here's a guy that got a bat to the face, and you get to watch it. And I'm like, I don't want to watch that.
It's not that. It's never that, actually, in the movie. Which I think actually would have done... I think it would have been more publicly appealing if they would have gone that route, if that makes sense. Like, it would have been more... People would have liked it more, but instead it's much more reserved as far as film goes. I still think it's too much for you, though. Yeah.
I like reserved.
Yeah.
Most of what I don't like is, like, active violence and gore.
Yeah, but, like, cutting to a head on a pole is, like...
That's not my favorite, but, like, Pirates of the Caribbean has stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, but it's kind of fresh. I mean, it's not like bleeding down the pole, but it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
You're right.
There are
I probably
moments.
wouldn't like that. Well,
there is a moment that I can't talk about because it's important in the book. That is the moment, I should say. But
not to cross podcasts, but like if I didn't like the violence in Doctor Strange, I probably wouldn't like that.
No, but you would like reading it again.
Yeah,
like that's my recommendation.
Yeah. Anyways, Borne. The
Borne
book we're talking
is
about.
A great book. Before we went off on the road tangent, we were talking about Chef's kiss of work throughout this whole thing. We're kind of rambling through this entire thing. I want to talk about the giant kaiju. Okay, let's move. We're gonna move from this. Oh, we want to talk about the kids. Do you want to talk more about the kids?
Yeah, because you're talking about the kids and the movie and what yada yada yada. I think that shooting the kids in a movie as kids would really kind of take away from it because they're just trying to survive just like everybody else, you know?
I feel like you age them up to teens, you know?
Yeah.
Put them on the same cusp of Borne's mental age. You know what I mean? Like,
I get kind of what a director would do here. We're just like, this place is so shitty that even these kids are like scavenging to survive, but still like I don't necessarily know how to describe it very well, but I think that would take away from the story. But regardless, kids, they've got their cool piece of biotech, which is, let me tell you, one of the coolest biotech I think in the entire book.
Oh, the fire?
Yeah, the fire slug.
Fire. Yeah,
the slug that's just like the slug doesn't want anything but to be lit on fire. Like having a perpetual heat and fuel source would be great. In this like scenario.
Wild brief tangent. Elden Ring, I think, stole that from this book. Like, I think there's no way because that's actually a commonplace instead of the fires. I'm like, you gotta be shitting me. Anyway, moving on.
Anyway,
did you have any other thoughts on the magician and like her use of the children and like her manipulation for them, even as an economic resource, which is fucked up.
I kind of wish that was touched on a little bit more, but like the way that the magician ends is perfect, right? But it also leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Chief among them, like, what the fuck is up with the kids? You know?
Right.
Like, I think the kids and the way that they're used specifically by the magician means that immediately she is not sympathetic to anybody.
Right.
Because it's kind of fucked up.
It's very fucked up. It definitely paints her... Everything else in this world is very... We can be indifferent to her, treats us indifferently, like we were saying earlier. She is villainous. Mord is even indifferent. Mord's this elemental force. But she is evil.
Yeah. And even, like, the Mord proxies, like, you can kind of make a comparison between the children and the Mord proxies, but the Mord proxies are still just part of this force of nature that is Mord, whereas the children are... You can kind of... They're both the Mord proxies and the children, they're foot soldiers for their camp, right? But
they were both birthed for a purpose. You know what I mean? Like there's this weird bit where it's like the company created the Mord proxies and then the magician created the children. Like there's, again, that same dichotomy that we've been talking about.
But here's the question. Like, are the Mord proxies bears, or are they like Mord, not a bear, and were turned into a bear? Spoilers. I know, this is spoiler time.
Right. But that's a great question. I assume that they were... Okay, here's a fascinating assumption, and I'm not saying that this is correct by any means, but maybe the company was gradually turning the workers into Mord proxies, and that's why there are so few people left, is they gradually were transferring people into Mord proxies.
Which would make sense, certainly, based on what the company does and how Mord was created specifically. But, like, I also wouldn't put it past him to, like, just build bears out of whatever, you know.
Also could have done that. Yeah, there's no question there. I was just like, maybe to your point, maybe they are.
They don't talk about Mord proxies at all, actually, in like where they come from specifically.
No, they surmise that they maybe come from the company and that maybe they're created, but they're not sure. Like,
correct. You're right. They do say that they are created by the company.
It's surmised. It's not. It's never. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily say how they are created by the company, as opposed to, you know, the magician's children. You're pretty sure.
You're pretty sure.
Yeah. I guess it doesn't necessarily say that the magician kidnaps children and performs bio changes on them and makes them into foot soldiers. But that is... Yeah, that's kind of Occam's razor, whatever that is.
Yep.
Yeah, Occam's razor, where, like, the fewer assumptions you make, the more likely it is.
Right.
So, yeah. To be fair, when I read it, I thought that they literally cut pieces off of Mord and that's what created Mord proxies. And I know that's not correct, because there's 0% chance that like Mord would allow that to happen. But
it's fascinating. Again, that could work in a Miyazaki. Like, that would totally be a Miyazaki.
But it would be like Borne would be cutting the pieces off himself and making the proxies in a Miyazaki. But yeah.
Right. He'd be like shaving himself.
Yeah, and then they would flop off and become bears. Anyways.
Okay.
That's one fun thing at the end of the book, by the way, is that the Mord proxies just like make a village.
Right. Some of them are feral, but most of the rest like get along and they revert to being bears. So, but like communal bears, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So
it seems literally like they make a village, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But
okay, so we go into the company. We want to hit the end here. We're gonna hit the end part of the story.
We
go into the company. We go into the company. And so we have this fascinating escape, of course, that happens from the balcony cliffs. They get chased out. There's this incredible conflict. We figure out later that the magician's responsible for it all and, like, scenting and, like, leading them in because she knew the whole time where they were.
One thing that's interesting that I found in that escape, so there's bears in their area. But they said later that they said later in this bit of foreshadowing that they had heard the bears burrowing up on top of balcony cliffs.
Yes.
And they said in the book, I don't know if this is for sure or not, but that they had sat there and listened to where they went in the balcony cliffs to figure out where the traps were. So I don't actually know if it's the magician that let the bears into balcony cliff.
The magician claims to have scented them in that final scene. Like, the magician claims to have done it. So maybe not.
I guess I probably should have read the back again.
It seems as though it was in the couple of final moments with the magician. So
okay. Anyways, so she
reveals that she did a lot of things.
Yeah. They were forced to leave balcony cliffs by these bears. They escape to do they call it a cistern?
Yes, the cistern. Okay.
They escape to the cistern, and then they go to the company, and there's bears. 2 bears specifically.
Yes, 2 specific bears.
One that's just chilling at the bottom of the pool, by the way.
Right. It somehow survived the, like, chew 'em up pool. These are the fascinating moments of horror again. Like, and it's not even horror, right? But it's like it's spooky moments where Jeff ratchets up the tension and we get an understanding of, like, what's going on and how they're being chased and everything else. So, thinking about the time through the company, we've got, obviously, as mentioned, kind of the horrible moments with the bears and the pools and kind of the way that they show up instead of the company. But we also have the sort of the climb through the company in which Rachel is drained of all energy. Wick is almost useless. And we find out at the end here, of course, that she knew all of Wick's secrets and still carried him and still did all of this stuff, which is, I don't think she ever says in the entire book that she loves him, but this is fascinating proof that she does. You know what I mean? Like, love is only ever said to Borne directly, and even when Borne confronts her about Wick, she doesn't say it. And so, when Borne is Wick, she doesn't say that she loves him. Wick, which
because
is
I do
a fascinating
believe that
moment.
Borne Wick does ask specifically if she loves Wick.
Yeah, right. Which, exactly. So
and
to
she
that
says,
point,
"Why the fuck are you asking me?" Basically.
right. And she never. I don't think, if I remember correctly, she never says "I love you" specifically to Wick in any of those moments.
Yeah.
But this is clear proof of deep, profound love.
Yeah. And, like, can't live without, which I guess is love. But, like, not even being able to fathom living without somebody, One thing that I want to, like, roll back real quick is...
Yeah.
One element that I really liked is when they saw the bear out on... Before they got into the cave, the crack, the canyon, whatever. They saw the bear out there, and there's like, that bear's going to be here in 10 minutes. Right. And I really like that because it gave us a sense of like how long it was going to take. And it also was like turning over an hourglass of like, this is how much time you have, guys, And so it was like, it wasn't necessarily horror, but it was like kind of, because it's just like, you knew what was coming. You know how long it's going to take. It might get here and kill you regardless. So I just really liked kind of how it specified that. Anyways. And then, the crack. I'm extremely claustrophobic. I didn't like that at all.
It's pretty insane. I'm not extremely claustrophobic, but I'm a little bit. If for a prolonged period of time, like for me, it's like I can sit in a small space for a little bit, but if I have to be there for a long time, I'm gonna be neurotic about it.
Yeah. So then they get into the building, which is the first time we actually see the company, right? Like the company is now.
Right.
So, which I thought was interesting. I wish we could have gotten a little bit more about it. It kind of reminded me of, it's going to sound really dumb, but like Portal.
Kind of, yeah.
You're in this lab, this like office, this whatever, and something terrible has happened, and you don't necessarily know exactly what. So
right, you're unaware of the specifics of the goings on.
Yeah. So especially because for a lot of the book, the company was like built up as like this big bad boogeyman, and then you get in there and there's like nothing. Again,
I think what's so fun about the company, and we talked about kind of the indifference of the world, but it's sort of the malevolence of, I don't want to say like normalcy, but like the malevolence of something that appears or feels normal to you, right? Like this idea that we've become so complacent, I think. So it's this sort of indifference and complacence that gradually elevated the company to this stasis in which it could be this dominant force inside of the city. That's how I think about it. It's like it is literally just a company of people, but it's like a company of people that have had, gradually their morals scrubbed away about how they think about things. And like they've always strived for, quote, more, quote, but what is more? It's just, more is just different at this point.
And I guess for a lot of the book, the company itself has been secondary to Mord.
Yes.
Which at this time, by the way, Borne is a giant bear and he's fighting Mord.
Kaiju fight, straight up Godzilla versus King Kong.
Literally like out of Pacific Rim right now.
Right.
But yeah,
they're just wailing on each other. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of what happens the entire time we're in the company. But I always expected like outside of Borne, the company to actually be dangerous in some way. And it's really not once you get in there. It's just there's not a whole lot there at all, you know.
I think that's kind of what I'm trying to poke at is like there's something like it's intended to be this like vast evil, but in fact it's like it's a bunch of micro decisions that made it a bad thing, if that makes sense. Like it never, the company never intended to do massive wrong. It's just that everything accumulated to a point in which it became wrong.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like
Kind
that's
of like Jurassic Park.
Yes, entirely. I get a very similar kind of element from a lot of Michael Crichton works here. I think Prey is more apt, but
Yeah. Still.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a bunch of confusing stuff on the back when we hit the end of the book here.
Well, there's a bunch of stuff that throws our perceptions up
Correct.
and into the wind.
Which is why I had 100% meant to read like the last like 40-ish pages of this book again, and I just didn't get the chance to, unfortunately, because there's just so much that happens in the back part of this between entering the company and leaving the company. There's a lot that happens that like that changes everything.
Where do you want to start?
My timeline is going to be a little bit skewed, and we've kind of already talked about it, but the Wick revelation is major.
Right.
We need to talk about the foxes.
Yep.
And I want to talk about the door.
Okay. All right.
Those are kind of three very important things. Because
Let's start with the foxes.
They're obviously biotech.
Okay.
They have cloaking, if I remember correctly.
Well,
or blinking.
Yes. They kind of dissolve. Yeah. We're not sure. Do they cloak? Do they fade? Do they disappear?
They disappear when, they disappear on you. So I guess I always assumed that it was cloaking, similar to what the magician can do, which is kind of where she got her cloak.
Sure.
Right? That they were similar. But there's definitely something else about them that I haven't figured out yet. They're very important, and I don't know why.
Oh, yeah.
So, because, like, they're a consistent theme throughout the entire book. Like, they follow Borne all over the place. They're kind of always following Rachel as well. I believe it first comes up after she finds Borne. And then when we get to the finale with the magician, they're all there. So there's definitely something important with these foxes that I have not figured out yet.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things with the foxes that are pointed out within this book. So I don't want to try to like nail anything down for you because there is technically a short story and then Dead Astronauts. But
the foxes are important. Okay.
Well, all that I'm saying is the foxes aren't done yet, but the foxes here are distributing the goods from the door, from the portal, right? Like they are taking the things and they're actually feeding the city. So they are, as opposed to being parasitic like everything else is, they're actually acting like symbiotes to make sure that things make it out to everyone else. They are trying to ensure that life survives beyond just Mord and otherwise. So they are actively working on behalf of the people, which is fascinating because they are actually advantageously good.
Is that
like which is also why I think they support Mord. Or sorry, not Mord, Borne.
Is that said in this book or is that part of the short story?
It's neither the short story. It is said in this book.
I do not remember that, but
so it's
like I said,
implied.
I probably should have read.
It's
the
implied.
Back half again, or back,
the important part in the back 40 pages, as it relates to the fox, is they clearly dug tunnels and were clearly seeding the city with goods.
Okay, I knew that
That's
they dug tunnels in there.
Everything
but
else
I
is
didn't
connections.
I didn't make the connection with the seeding the city, so I guess that makes sense. But yeah, they have. I guess I always assumed that they had cloaking. So, but yeah,
cloaking is its own thing. That's kind of a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
so foxes, there's that. Which I guess the existence of the Hall of Mirrors, the mirror room, I forget exactly what she calls it.
She calls it the Hall of Mirrors.
The Hall of Mirrors, yep. I guess that kind of answers the question about the door as well, because the door to get down to the Hall of Mirrors has been, as they said, like expertly like cemented off. Like they do not want people to get down to the Hall of Mirrors, which I'm assuming that's just because that's where the goods come into the city from. And so they didn't want, like the company didn't want whatever to come in there. Am I correct? That's where the goods come into the city from, into the Hall of Mirrors.
Yes. but I think one of them was open yet, right? There was one door. There's one silvery portal.
I'm talking at the top of the stairwell. Before they get to the infirmary.
Yeah, okay.
The door at the top of the stairwell has
Yeah.
what they said was expertly like cemented off.
Yes,
effectively,
that
and
is
they had
definitely cemented off.
Yeah, and they had to get in through a like a grate or something.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
So, obviously somebody knew what was down there and somebody didn't want people to get to it. Right. Or they didn't want whatever was coming from elsewhere to get out.
We are approaching fun territory of where I have more information than you have.
Great.
So I cannot fully
All right.
talk about it.
Let's
No, I mean, you are welcome to interrogate it because I think that's fun, and I will not spoil because that's kind of the nature of the show on the regular Adam. But
okay, so I'm gonna be PJ.
Yep.
For a moment,
You are now PJ.
I am now PJ. Apparently, so yeah, because they make a really big deal about how that was literally like about how it was closed off, how that door at the top was closed off.
Yes.
Well, now I think that they don't want things to get out because, as it says in there, there's more Bornes. That's one of the big things, one of the big, I guess, revelations in this final chapter is that there's just a box full of Bornes.
100 Bornes.
Yeah, and what the far off company, whatever was sending them, what they wanted these Bornes to do. Because we know what Borne can do, right? You know, Borne can eat and absorb and destroy as much as he wants to. Well, so what can 100 do? You know?
Right.
Maybe whoever closed off the door up top knew that whatever was sending them things maybe wasn't perfectly benevolent. And they knew that something was going to happen.
To extrapolate on this a little bit, I think it's fascinating to think that they thought sending 100 Bornes into this world was good without thinking that it might not wipe out everything. So, like, I think of Borne in not Borne the creature, but Borne the organism that could be this box of the extra Bornes, right? These vase-like plants. They're like sampling organisms, and so they were to be sent out to like sample this other universe and then return with information on it, if that makes sense. Like they're like in a way they're consuming a universe or like a world or like whatever's on the other side, but they're also returning all of that biomass, A, and then B, they're also coming back with all the information about what was there at one point because they don't lose anything, they retain everything.
Yeah, that starts getting into really like out there sci-fi territory.
Right.
Because so far, this book is very grounded in reality. Heavy air quotes.
Yeah.
Heavy air quotes. We have a flying bear, but still,
Me too.
Most of this book is fairly grounded in reality. There's like 2 outliers, and it's Mord and Borne.
Right.
That like can't be explained by the current world. So, I mean,
in some things are a stretch, but like,
yeah,
you know, they're not crazy.
What you're saying makes so much sense in terms of like, because yeah, what does Borne do best? Borne absorbs and Borne retains. So like maybe what he was born to do was he very well could be just gathering supplies for elsewhere. Like whoever was on the other side of this company tunnel was like, we don't care about that city. Let's take everything that we can and bring it back here, and then we can use it. It's effectively advanced scavenging using biotech. But I don't know. Maybe we'll learn more when we read Dead Astronauts.
That'll be interesting. I'm going to leave that company grenade right there.
Yep. We don't need to talk about it anymore. We'll
get to it eventually.
We got somebody who got hit in the head with a rock that we got to talk about quick.
We do. We definitely want to talk about the absolute murder of the magician, but I think that we should, before we talk about that, talk about Wick's letter comes after that, doesn't it? But it impacts the story before that.
So Wick's letter technically comes before. Because
Rachel reads it before she murders the magician.
And immediately before she murders the magician, she says something effective. The magician like misunderstood one thing. I had already read the letter. Yeah. Basically.
Right.
And so, yeah, the letter was like I said, these last 40 pages are just like so many bomb drops all at once. Like, also,
Right.
the like magician's murder scene is one of my favorite scenes.
It's so good.
It's what like everybody says to do with like the evil villains is just like kill them when they're monologuing.
Kill them while they're monologuing.
Literally what she does.
Yeah, it is that trope to a T. Like it is the execution of that expectation on a trope to a T. I have it right here. I bookmarked it specifically because I love it. The magician was still talking. The magician in that cavern was still trying to tell me things. Why I should join her. What this all meant. How the city could be saved from itself. But I heard no more from her. I hit the magician with a rock until she was dead, and the animals did nothing to stop me.
Yeah. It's just like, I just hit the magician with a rock.
Just like that. Like, there's a little bit more there, but it's never like, she doesn't like beat her into the ground. It's nothing else. It's just like, I beat her until she stopped talking. Like,
yeah. And then later she's just like, I'm sure that she'll rot in the bowels of the company or something to the effect of that. And just like, I don't care anymore. She's dead. Bye-bye.
Right. Yep.
God. That's such a fun scene.
It's wild because it passes so quickly. Like it is so, to your point, like it is literally, it's what everyone wants in every movie ever. Like it is the definition of like, shut them up before they talk.
Yeah.
Or while they're talking.
And like, if you consider, we talked earlier about the triangle that we have, and like the two quote unquote villains, Mord and the magician. Mord, like, is forever. Like, the Mord fight takes literally like
hours,
and the magician is just done. Like, the magician is all of like 5 pages, and the Mord fight is probably close to 50 when it starts to when it ends. You know, it's like not all 50 pages are, you know, talking specifically about the Mord fight. I think the Mord fight only has itself like a page and a half, but still in the general time frame, it's just such a fun difference between the two of them. Because it's just so much fun. The magician, that was one of my favorite things the first time I read this gosh darn book, is the magician's end. Just like, come on, just hit her with a rock.
Like it feels so right in every way. You know, like I appreciated this endlessly. And
you're just like expecting this big showdown because like the magician has been such a big character, like doing things behind the scenes, like being an adversary to Mord, and you're expecting like
he's gonna have this invisible legion and we're gonna have to like run away again.
Yeah.
You know?
Or like even if it's a one-on-one fight, it's gonna be like a cool like, oh, she goes invisible sometimes, we're gonna figure it out. Just like, no, we're just gonna hit her with the rock while she's talking.
Right. God, it's just put her down.
So much fun.
It's so clever. Like and by clever I mean it's not clever on Rachel's part. It's very blunt, of course, and you know, generally otherwise. But from Jeff's perspective, it's just like sometimes the villains just need to shut the fuck up because like you're not really a villain. Like you're just a fucking person. Again, it's that indifference of the world. Like no one gives a shit about what you're saying or what you're doing, so long as someone else can stop or like take advantage of whatever's going on. Yeah. I don't know. There's this interesting like grimdark nature to it that I adore.
And it's a really good like, because I believe it's after that she says something to the effect of like, she doesn't know, like what the magician doesn't know is that I read the letter, right?
Yeah. So here it is. And she couldn't know one other secret. I had already read Wick's letter. So really you could say that the magician never had a chance.
Yeah.
It's just like,
so it's like,
bam.
That's so much fun, because I believe immediately after that is when we go into what was actually in the letter, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Then we go into the letter.
Yeah, which
we should talk about.
Yeah, you know how I talked very early in this podcast about how I don't like exposition being thrown at me? It's okay at the end.
It's okay, yeah, right, to give context, to provide context to everything else.
Because that's what Wick's letter is Wick's letter is, okay, here are all of the answers that maybe you didn't catch when you were reading through.
Right.
It's like,
or that you didn't piece together.
Yeah, did you ever read Encyclopedia Brown?
Yes, right. It's when you can flip to the end.
Yep. Yeah. It's like, it gives you all of the answers, And it actually doesn't give you all the answers, to be fair. There's things in Wick's letter that you probably wouldn't have grabbed.
Right.
But it fills in a lot of the gaps,
Right.
that it makes a lot of things make sense. So,
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I think are important to touch on here. One we talked about earlier. It's the fact that Wick is not a person, but is biotech, is effectively a clone, like we've been talking about this whole time, which again gets to that like android loving people question. Like, can an android love? Obviously, an android can love. An android can care so much that they stop a person, another biotech, which it feels so weird to like even talk about these in context, because you can just get down to this very base level, but to prevent someone else from killing themselves and to then live a very fruitful life with someone else and like everything else. This letter is so brutal and poignant in a lot of ways, where it's like, you know what, I took away bad memories and I'm very sorry about it, and I live with that ghost daily, but at the same time I live with the fear that you might understand that I am not the person that you expected, and in fact I'm not a person at all to begin with. Just there's so many confounding points here.
it throws like everything else into like, it sharpens up the rest of the book, where like you can see why certain decisions were made and why certain things were like withheld and things like that, So
Well, the memory beetles become so poignant because it was like this big deal that he was this drug dealer at the beginning, and like why people need memory beetles so they can forget, they can erase bad things, everything else. It's just like, it is that Chekhov's gun that lives with you throughout the entire story and then pays off in this grandiose moment. You're like, how did I not think about the fact that the main character might want to lose her memories? Like, how did I not consider the fact?
Yeah. Well, there was nothing necessarily. I guess there was. There were indications in the story that she might have gaps in her memory, but because we go back to other things she remembers, right? We know all about, her.
Well, she blocks out her
childhood and things
parents'
like that.
death, right? And so it's like, oh, you're forgetting this because you're selectively like trying to not remember it.
Right.
Like, that makes sense. Yeah.
But now we know that it's not that she's not trying to remember, it's because she can't. She at this point physically cannot.
Yeah.
Remember those things. And like, the one thing that really got to me this time that I didn't catch the first time is that Wick sold those memories to the magician. Yeah. Specifically, yeah.
Right.
Because the memories that she has were, and how she got there, the magician would want to know, because she doesn't know where those things are coming from, right? From wherever else. And we, of course, now also don't know. But that is so valuable to the magician, because knowledge is power to her, especially this knowledge, because she wants to effectively take over for the company, destroy the company, whatever. And so knowing where... So Rachel was sent from the company as effectively scavenge to the city.
Right.
Right? And so she would remember how she kind of got into those situations. And so she has inside knowledge of the company that's valuable to the magician. That's it.
In addition, it's leverage over Wick. Like, that's the other thing, is that it's leverage over Wick in his decision, because she was a member of the company and had leverage inside of the company. Like, she was a part of that. But there was another element that I was thinking of. Holy shit, did it vanish? Oh no. Relating to Rachel, the company, the parents, the memory. Oh fuck. Okay, anyway. By the time we reach the end of this story, by the time we reach the end of Wick's letter, we get this understanding of him as this android, of Rachel as this person of whom didn't want to live anymore, of kind of a number of different components as they plug into their personality and whatnot. I am perpetually kind of fascinated by this letter, because it reveals so much about the construction of things within the company as well, and the way that it kind of turned, and the way that like Mord was a person, and then
that is one of my favorite twists, by the way, in this whole book, is that like Wick was friends with Mord the human.
Right. But Wick was an android that worked on Mord to turn him into a bear. You know,
did he work on it? I thought that he wasn't on that project. I thought that he just like sat with him.
You're right that he witnessed him become a bear.
But they used his research on the fish lady,
yes,
in order to turn Mord into a bear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Literally the revelation that Mord was a person. Sorry, the confirmation that Mord was a person.
Right.
Is one of my favorite parts of this book.
It just drives you up a wall because you're like, what really was going on? Like, and it gets back to the core question of like, what makes a human? Like, what is humanity? Ugh.
A lot of it is like, what were they trying to achieve through this?
Right.
You know,
right?
Were they creating Mord into a weapon? Did they want to control the city? You know, there's a lot of questions there, which might be answered next time in Dead Astronauts. I don't know if it is. Don't answer.
Don't
answer.
No answers
Good.
to anything.
I don't want to know.
Yeah, no, I would not do that to you. You know, Team No Hype. That's sort of my general vague comments.
I'm not expecting any answers to anything, clearly.
Again, my only thing with Dead Astronauts is try to book enough time to read it straight through. Try to.
Oh yeah, that's one of my major flaws is that I like to read books in one sitting, which is why I don't read as much as I used to because it's very difficult to find time to do that.
Right. This is a book that almost demands it, and don't feel bad if you have to go backwards. That's the other thing. Anyway.
I will try to read it twice probably before we do it.
You might need to. Okay. We're hitting the end of this. We're hitting the end of the book. We've touched on a number of the topics. We've touched on the giant reveals of Rachel's backstory, of her parents' death, of a number of things. Is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't talked about yet, outside of maybe the final denouement that happens with the kind of community that forms at the very end of the novel?
We've touched on kind of the Deus Ex Machina that was his sickness and the pills, right?
Yeah, it doesn't feel Deus Ex. What feels Deus Ex about it to you?
It kind of feels like something that was simply put there to make them go to the company a little bit.
Oh, it's more of a MacGuffin. I wouldn't call it
MacGuffin,
Deus Ex.
yeah. But then, like, immediately afterwards, they're just like, oh, he figured out how to make his own pills. Bye-bye.
It took him 4 months, but yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that's technically past the climax, so I guess I can forgive that. We don't necessarily need all of that answers, but
right.
Yeah. But no, I think I'm sure we didn't touch on everything. We could probably keep going for another hour and a half, 2 hours, in order to be honest, really talk about everything.
We talked about how good the prose is, but we didn't really highlight the prose in those kind of high moments.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's not something we're going to do. But, of course, the recommendation is reread the book. Like, it's beautiful. This is an incredible novel.
Actually, real quick, can we talk about something as in how the Borne Mord fight ends?
Oh, yeah, the like, flattening and, like, absorption. Yeah.
So, like, Borne transforms into a copy of Mord, and he goes off and he's like, hey, Mord, come at me, right?
Yeah. And
so that happens before they enter the company. And then when they leave the company is when the end of this fight happens. So, and like this is when I said that there's like that page and a half of Mord Borne fight.
Yeah.
And so like Borne loses as Mord. He has to give up his Mord shape. And then he basically becomes a manta ray. For lack of a better term, he becomes a massive flat pancake. Mord is like, this is a sign of weakness. He goes for the attack, and then Borne, like Santa's gift bag, comes around him, and then disappears him. They said there's a flash of light, and then they're both gone. But
I think that this is an example of what Borne was already doing to like children and things like that, like the children that attacked, not just random children, but maybe some random children we don't really know, but to the kids that like attacked Rachel at the beginning. I think that ultimately his attack wasn't so much It's kind of horrifying if you think about it, but it wasn't like he became like a squid hat and like chomped down on their brains. I think that he was ultimately more like a rug that then like formed up around and pulled down and like became one and then did it again and then did it again, because it's more of a coalescence to some degree, like pulling everything in.
And like at the end of this fight, Rachel finds Borne again, but he is small vase himself. And they put him on the balcony, and he doesn't do anything.
Right.
Like, I'm going to be honest with you. I expected at some point in this book there to be, like, an indication that he moved or something. Like, oh, sometimes we find him on the other side of the balcony. Or, like, when I wasn't looking, you know, he teetered or something like that. I was expecting something like that, and it didn't happen. And I was very pleased of that. I like when my expectations are subverted in pleasant ways.
It's a great bit because it also says that Borne is okay with just being there and observing. Like it's this moment of like he had this hunger, this perpetual hunger that he couldn't satiate no matter how many people or whatever he did. And finally, the biggest hunger of all, the thing that he was sent back for, he eats Mord, and he feels satisfied. And at the same time as his satisfaction, he's reduced down to the smallest thing, his original form.
That's an incredibly good point that I did not think about, that he might just be satisfied after eating Mord.
I don't want to say that it's just like he is done, like that was his goal mission, but I do want to at the very least say like he set the status quo, he established a status quo, and that is enough for him as an individual, as a person, to be like, okay, I can be happy having helped everyone that I loved and more.
I was more talking about, like, he consumed enough volume.
Oh, sure.
That he was, like, no longer hungry.
Right.
And didn't necessarily need to consume more, because Mord is massive, as we talked about at the top.
I hadn't considered that. I was thinking about it a little bit more metaphorically.
Right. Yeah. Which makes much more sense. But Mord is very large. And Borne
is also
ate
very
him.
Big. Yeah.
And, you know, he was eating, like, if you eat a person a day, how many people equals Mord?
Right.
A lot.
There was kind of a question there.
Yeah.
So. All right.
So there's the fight, and then they make a society, basically.
Right. The end of the book is basically like, hey, what if we didn't do everything that we were doing before to each other?
Yeah.
Finger guns.
Like, they eliminated the two biggest threats in the city, and then they just made a village. And let me tell you, that felt so good after all. It does feel good. Yeah. After all of the literal indifference, having like
positive catharsis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Catharsis. That is the correct word. Is just like, we got to let go of the negative emotions that we had and like the tension that we as readers built up, worried for these characters, and the characters got to like live good lives, and just like they got to start rebuilding. And they were just like, to be fair, the rain was kind of bullshit, gonna be honest with you. There was like 3 days of rain that was just like everything greened up magically.
Oh,
basically.
That was okay.
And the ponds overflowed, and all of the good biotech went into the city.
So I don't think that was bullshit from my perspective. That is the accumulation of Borne eating Mord and then giving himself back. It's that recycling nature element again. You know what I mean? Like, it's
still bullshit.
Okay.
Fine. In terms of like story beats.
Sure.
That one 100% felt like a Deus Ex though.
I don't know that it's Deus Ex. I think that it's
not
underexplained.
I am not using Deus Ex correctly, but it still felt a little bit contrived, and it felt a little bit
that's fair
out there, where it's like
all
of a sudden the rain fell and everything was fine, you know.
Right.
Which,
but
to be
conveniently,
fair,
there's a sequel and a half. So
yeah, and to be fair, after everything we went through, we definitely deserve that. We deserve the good rain, and we deserve everything good happening. So, but yeah, the end of the book I enjoyed quite a bit, because there's just so many books that's like, haha, they won, but now they're dead or whatever. And I'm like, no, just give me the good ending. It's like when I beat Breath of the Wild the first time, all I wanted to do was run around, a post-Ganon Hyrule and see everybody happy and there's no monsters. And you know what it doesn't let me do? That.
I can't think of any like big open world game that ends that way.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. But let me tell you, I would feel really good if...
Yeah. Cool.
We should probably be done.
Man, anything else? Anything else that you have on this book? It's not that long.
There's just so much in this book. There's so much in this book. And I'm so excited. You said there's a short story?
There is. Strange Bird.
Okay, so I should tackle that. Should I tackle that before Dead Astronauts?
Yes.
Okay. Because we got Dead Astronauts coming up, if I remember correctly.
We won't cover it necessarily, but we may like talk about it at the very beginning, or if it's relevant. So,
yeah, but it seems like good reading before Dead Astronauts. So
it is in some ways necessary, and in some ways answers some questions in this book that you may have. The Strange Bird is even referenced inside of this book a couple of times. It seems
that's true.
Magician's
They
Slave.
do talk about the Strange Bird like twice.
Yeah. Yep. There are a number of small things that were referenced in this book that I didn't realize were full-ass things in the other story, but that'll be exciting.
There's a ton of stuff that we just didn't touch on in this book because we don't have the time. But
my God, you could talk about this book for hours and hours and hours and
everything means something, which is nice.
It's fascinating. It's brilliant. It's layered beautifully. I love this story. And to anyone who doesn't like it, I still like you, but I question your taste. Yeah.
Try it again.
Cool. All right. Well, Adam, where can people find you on the internet if they want to follow you, support you, otherwise? Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. Of course, coming on and doing the short report with me. PJ might read it eventually. He may join us for Dead Astronauts if he can catch up. God. But I did want to cover this. I've wanted desperately to cover this since we started the show in general. I think I've been talking to you about this literally for a year and a half.
Yeah, We've been talking about this for a very long time. Yeah, anytime you want me to come on, if you want a book to be read and Peter doesn't want to read it, I loved this book, and pretty much anything sci-fi I will tackle. I've made a goal to read a lot of like the classic sci-fi, so I recently read I, Robot and things like that. So I'm very excited. But about me, I stream every Wednesday on twitch.tv/An0therCastle. The O is a 0. You can find me on Twitter at An0ther_Castle with the O is a 0 with the underscore in there. Follow that. Yeah. I will, apparently, according to Crossland, we will have my other podcast on the main feed at some point that we recorded.
We will, yes.
6 months ago.
The Speculative Knowledge. I think it was Speculative Knowledge.
Yeah, it was a Speculative Knowledge.
Yeah.
So
that'll be out whenever that show comes out. I think we're aiming for late June now.
That'll be fun.
For when that releases. Or for when the episodes start to release, I should say.
But yeah. You can also find me on the Words and Whiskey Discord, which you can get to how?
Via patreon.com. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Patreon.com/words and whiskey. It's great. We've got a number of different things going on there. We greatly appreciate everyone's support, including Adam's and otherwise. And, it's so fantastic to be able to like spend time and talk about these books that we like really care about and everything else. But I'm also very grateful not only for the ears that I'm talking into right now, but for the voices that I hear back inside of the community that we've kind of grown. So it's pretty neat. I don't know.
Yeah,
I dig it. It's pretty neat.
It's a cool group. Like it's one of my favorite things to check. Like every day is the Discord. Is just like I always have it up at work too. It's just like chatting with people and whatnot about just our lives and stuff and the shows that are coming out. It's cool. So
yeah. Beyond that, you can obviously find me at any of the Words and Whiskey shows. You can also find me on Wednesdays for the most part with playing games with Adam. So that's like true. If you're looking for something, again, the link to Adam's Twitch will be inside of this episode.
We're playing Tiny Tina's Wonderlands right now.
We are. It's a grand old
Although
time.
I don't think we're doing it this Wednesday. I think somebody's got
I don't think we are. We're probably doing either Overwatch or
something else. We'll figure it out. Follow the Twitter.
So thank you so much again for listening to the show. Be sure to check out our social media, as previously mentioned. We've got a lot coming out on Atomic Pylon Media's network. Here we've got Tales of Kana. We've got, of course, the short reports that you're listening to right now, regular Words and Whiskey, Howler Pod, as well as the 2 bonus shows that were previously Patreon exclusives. Next month, PJ and I are going to be tackling Elantris, potentially with a special guest. Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, his first novel. Adam, we're going to slot in your episode somewhere randomly instead of short pours whenever you read Dead Astronauts. So, like, because we have our months booked, so it's going to be like a bonus one inside of the thing.
Cool.
So whenever it works out, we'll do it. It might be June, it might be July. So for folks at home who liked this, just read it and be prepared in the next 2 or 3 months.
I'm down whenever, so I just gotta read it.
I know. I got to sit down and like re-explore that mind fuck. I thought about doing it today again just because I like wanted to, but I was like, I don't want to bring anything up that might be, problematic.
I'm very excited to explore some more of this universe, actually.
Yes, so. It'll be a lot of fun. I think you'll really like Strange Bird, and I assume you'll like Dead Astronauts. But with that, also make sure that you check out all the links in the show notes. Again, you can find links to Adam's Twitch, Twitter, and otherwise inside of the show notes. You can find our scheduled Patreon previous episodes, our websites, and socials all in one convenient spot. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit at Words Whiskey Pod. If you want to send us an email with any kind of comments or anything like that, wordsandwhiskyshow@gmail.com or patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey. Other than that, leave us a review on your favorite podcatcher. And if you aren't already subscribed to the Short Pours, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you leave a review. All right, thank you so much for the support. Yeah, you can hear more of Adam and more things. Thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.